Hey everyone. Welcome back to Supreme Harry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Gringotts' blood inheritance ritual at age 11 revealed 31 stolen vaults and international Wizengamot arrested Dumbledore live? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The blood knows the letter from Gringotts arrived on a Tuesday, which Harry thought was an odd day for anything important to happen. He'd been on the roof of the garden shed, his usual hiding spot when Dudley and his gang were in territorial moods, when the owl dropped it directly into his lap with the kind of precise accuracy that felt almost pointed. Not the school owls he'd seen occasionally delivering post to the neighbors' children at their fancy prep schools. This one was enormous, tawny gold, with eyes the color of old coins, and it watched him with an expression that, on a human face, would have been called expectant. The envelope was thick cream parchment sealed with wax the color of dried blood, stamped with a goblin's profile in profile, sharp-nosed, sharp-eyed, sharp everything, and below the seal, in script so precise it hurt to look at directly, Harry James Potter roof of the garden shed, number 4, Privet Drive Little Whinging, Surrey. Harry stared at that address for a long moment. Not the cupboard under the stairs, which had been his official bedroom until he'd started showing enough accidental magic that Vernon had quietly, resentfully upgraded him to Dudley's spare room. Not the smallest bedroom, which was what the school form said. The roof of the garden shed. Whoever had sent this had known exactly where he was, down to the square foot. He broke the seal. To Harry James Potter, you are hereby formally invited to attend a standard inheritance and blood status confirmation ritual at Gringotts Bank, London, at your earliest convenience, and no later than your 11th birthday, July 31st of this year. This ritual is your right as a magical citizen of Britain and has been registered with the International Confederation of Wizards under Protocol 7, Article 3 of the Magical Inheritance Treaty of 1689. Please note, attendance is not optional under the terms of the above treaty. Failure to attend will result in the International Confederation dispatching a representative to ensure your compliance. A portkey has been enclosed. It activates at 9 a.m. on July 31st. Gringotts Bank High Chief Ragnarok, presiding at the bottom of the letter, in smaller, different handwriting, cramped and angular, like someone more used to carving stone than writing on paper, come alone. Tell no one. Your life may depend on it. Harry looked at the date on his watch. July 30th. He folded the letter carefully, tucked it into his sock, the only place Dudley never checked, climbed down from the shed, walked into the house, ate the slightly stale toast Aunt Petunia left out for him like a bone for a dog, and went to bed. He did not sleep. At 8:57 a.m. on July 31st, Harry Potter stood in the back garden wearing his least threadbare jeans, a faded green t-shirt 3 sizes too large, and trainers held together in the left toe region by a strip of electrical tape he'd found in the garage. His hair was doing its usual impression of a startled hedgehog. He had 43 pence in his pocket and what he suspected was a portkey, a small brass compass that had fallen out of the Gringotts envelope, held loosely in his right hand. The Dursleys were still asleep. Vernon's snoring vibrated faintly through the bedroom window above him. Harry thought about leaving a note. Then he thought about what note he'd write, to people who would likely be more annoyed by his absence insofar as it disrupted their schedule than concerned by it, and he put that idea away. At 9 a.m. exactly, the compass lurched in his hand like a living thing, and the garden dissolved. Gringotts was exactly as grand and unsettling as he'd heard, which was to say he'd never heard of it at all, but the moment he landed in a marble-floored antechamber and looked up at the vaulted ceiling 30 feet above him, carved with scenes of goblin warriors standing triumphant over prostrate human figures, he got a very clear sense of the bank's institutional personality. A goblin was already waiting for him. Not a teller. This one wore robes of deep burgundy with gold trim, carried no ledger, and stood with the particular stillness of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Harry Potter, the goblin said. Not a question. Yeah, Harry said, because it seemed rude to say obviously and he was trying to be polite. I am Sharprock. I will be conducting your pre-ritual consultation. Follow me, please. Harry followed. They went through a door behind the main counter that he was fairly sure no human had ever been invited through, down a corridor that sloped gently downward, the walls shifting from marble to raw granite to something dark and warm that Harry couldn't identify, lit by torches that burned with a blue-white light that cast no shadows. "What exactly is the ritual?" Harry asked, because he'd been doing calculations and had determined that the only thing worse than asking a stupid question was not asking and then being surprised later. "A blood inheritance ritual confirms your magical lineage, activates any dormant house lordships to which your blood entitles you, and opens access to any vaults held in trust under your name," Sharprock said, without looking back. "It is standard practice for all heirs at the age of majority, which for Wizarding Britain is 11 years of age at enrollment." "Right," Harry said. "And why didn't anyone tell me about this before now?" Sharprock paused at the end of the corridor. Turned. Looked at him with eyes that were old and sharp and, Harry realized, angry, not at him, but at some general state of affairs that Harry suspected he was only beginning to understand. "That," Sharprock said carefully, "is precisely what we intend to find out." The ritual room was smaller than Harry had expected. Round, with a low ceiling, the walls inlaid with runes that caught the torchlight and held it like embers. In the center of the room was a stone basin, waist-high on a grown man, which meant it came up roughly to Harry's chest. The basin contained a liquid that Harry couldn't quite see directly, it seemed to shift when he looked at it, suggesting silver, then gold, then something the color of deep water. Sharprock gestured to the basin. "Place your right hand over it. I will make a small cut on your palm. 5 drops of blood are sufficient." "Does it hurt?" Harry asked. "Yes," Sharprock said, with what Harry chose to read as respect for honesty. "Briefly." There was one other goblin in the room, seated at a stone desk in the corner, stylus already poised over a scroll of parchment. There was also, Harry noticed, a human, a woman in her 40s, with close-cropped dark hair and the careful, observant expression of someone who had spent years learning to notice things other people missed. She wore robes with a crest Harry didn't recognize, crossed wands over a globe. "Who's she?" Harry asked. "Madame Delacroix," Sharprock said. "Observer from the International Confederation of Wizards. Her presence was requested under Protocol 7. She is here to witness and record. She will not interfere." Madame Delacroix met Harry's eyes and gave him a single, precise nod. Harry nodded back. He placed his right hand over the basin. The cut was quick, a blade he barely saw, a sting across his palm that he'd had worse from Aunt Petunia's rosebushes. 5 drops of blood fell into the liquid below, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the basin erupted. Not violently, there was no explosion, no flash of blinding light, nothing cinematic. What happened was quieter and, somehow, more alarming. The liquid in the basin rose in a column, thin as a candle flame, then wider still, and it began to speak. Not in words. In patterns. The runes on the walls pulsed in response, one after another, a cascade of activation that traveled around the room like a wave. The goblin at the desk began writing. His stylus moved without pause. "Potter," Sharprock said quietly, reading the runes as they activated. "Confirmed. Primary lineage, direct descent." A pause. Peveril. Another pulse. Black, through maternal grandmother, Doria Black née Potter, confirming dual lineage. The column was still rising. Gryffindor. Secondary lineage, 14th generation removed, sufficient for lordship claim under the dormancy clause. Harry was watching the column. It was still going. "Slytherin," Sharprock said, and his voice had changed slightly, tighter, like someone deliberately keeping emotion out of it. "Maternal lineage. Lily Potter née Evans, carrying a suppressed squib line tracing to," he stopped. Looked at the runes again. "To Mara P. Gaunt, through her mother's sister. A cousin line, 3 generations removed." The room was very quiet. "That means," Harry started. It means you carry the Slytherin heir's blood on both sides of your family, Sharprock said. Through your father's adoption of the Black Line, and through your mother's Gaunt connection. The combined claim supersedes Voldemort's own claim, as his line ran through Merope's direct descent, which died with him. You are, by blood right, the heir of Slytherin. Ha, Harry said. Madame Delacroix made a sound. It might have been a controlled inhale. The column kept rising. Hufflepuff, Sharprock continued. Ravenclaw. He had both hands now on the basin's edge, and his knuckles, whatever passed for knuckles on goblin hands, were white. Potter. Peveril. Black. Gryffindor. Slytherin. Hufflepuff. Ravenclaw. He looked up. 7 houses, Mr. Potter. You are heir to all 4 founders' lines. 7, the goblin at the desk said, for the first time, quietly. He was staring at the scroll. Yes, Sharprock said. 7. What does that mean, exactly? Harry asked. Practically speaking. It means, Sharprock said, that you are lord of 6 ancient and noble houses and 1 most ancient and noble house. It means you hold more seats on the Wizengamot than any individual in recorded British wizarding history. It means your vaults, he paused again. Your vaults should be considerable. Should be, Harry said, catching that word with the same instinct that had served him well through 11 years of the Dursleys. How considerable are they actually? Sharprock looked at him for a long moment. There was something in his expression that Harry would later identify as assessment, the look of someone determining whether the person in front of them was ready for what came next. That, Sharprock said, is why you were brought here today. Follow me. They went deeper. Through another door, down another corridor, into a room that contained nothing but a long stone table, 6 goblin accountants already seated, and enough parchment scrolls to paper Privet Drive. The scrolls were laid out in orderly rows, each tagged with wax seals, each seal a different color. Sharprock sat across from Harry. Madame Delacroix took a seat at the table's end, her own quill and parchment appearing from somewhere in her robes. Over the past several months, Sharprock began, Gringotts has conducted an internal audit of all Potter family vaults, past and present, active and dormant, as part of a routine generational review triggered by your approaching birthday. Routine, Harry repeated. Routine, Sharprock confirmed, and the slight emphasis on the word was so small Harry almost missed it. Almost. In the course of this audit, our curse breakers encountered a number of anomalies. He nodded to the nearest accountant, who unrolled the first scroll with the care of someone handling something they knew was explosive. Vault 687, the accountant read. Potter Trust Vault. Current balance, 236 galleons, 14 sickles, 3 nuts. Harry looked at the number. Is that a lot? For a boy at school, sufficient, Sharprock said. For the primary Potter heir? It is approximately 1% of what that vault should contain. He let that number sit for a moment. Vault 3, Potter Family Vault, the Ancestral Vault, established in 1192, is listed in our records as containing the accumulated wealth of 9 centuries of the Potter line. Gold, property deeds, investment holdings, artifact collections, political instruments, international wizarding currency in 6 denominations. He paused. We found it empty. Harry's hand, resting on the table, was very still. Empty, he said. Swept clean. Approximately 17 years ago, based on the vault's environmental dating. The vault was not broken into, it was accessed with authorization. Under a proxy power of attorney registered in this bank under the name of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, citing his position as your magical guardian. The room was very quiet. Harry could hear the torches burning. He emptied my family's vault, Harry said. He emptied 31 of them, Sharprock said. Harry looked up. 31 vaults, Mr. Potter. The Potter Family Vault. The Black Family Vault, including the contents placed in trust for you as Sirius Black's heir and godson, which transfers to you in the event of his incapacitation. The Peveril Vault, dormant for 3 centuries and containing what our experts estimate to be the oldest collection of magical artifacts in private British ownership. The Gryffindor Vault, the Slytherin Vault, the Hufflepuff Vault, and the Ravenclaw Vault, each one established by the founders themselves, each one containing objects and wealth that belong, by bloodline and treaty, to their respective heirs. And an additional 24 subsidiary vaults, investment accounts, property trusts, foreign currency holdings in France, Germany, Egypt, Japan, and the Americas, all funneled, over 17 years, into a single account registered under a shell identity our cursebreakers traced, after considerable effort, to a proxy firm controlled by Dumbledore's brother, Aberforth. Sharprock's fingers moved slightly on the table. The total sum extracted is, at current exchange rates, approximately 4 billion galleons. Harry said nothing for a very long time. 4 billion. He turned the number over in his mind and it kept sliding off, too large to hold. He thought about the electrical tape on his shoe. He thought about the Christmas presents from the Dursleys, a single 50-pence piece last year. He thought about the second-hand robes he'd been quietly assuming he'd be buying at Hogwarts because he had no idea what else to expect. "Okay," he said finally. Sharprock tilted his head. "Okay. I mean, yes. I understand. What happens now?" The Goblin High Chief, because it was at this moment that Ragnarok himself entered the room through a side door, and Harry understood from the way every other goblin in the room straightened almost imperceptibly that this was not Sharprock's superior, this was everyone's superior, stood at the head of the table. Ragnarok was older than anyone Harry had ever seen, which was saying something given that Aunt Petunia's neighbor, Mrs. Fig, was approximately 3,000. He was wrinkled and small and radiated authority the way a furnace radiates heat, not aggressively, just as a simple fact of its nature. "What happens now," Ragnarok said, in a voice like grinding millstones, "is that we have already happened it." He sat. 3 weeks ago, we submitted a formal report to the International Confederation of Wizards under the Magical Inheritance Treaty of 1689. The report detailed our findings, included documentation of all 31 vaults, the authorization records, the proxy accounts, and the full forensic accounting trail. Madame Delacroix, he glanced at her, is here because the Confederation dispatched her to verify our findings before they act. Harry looked at Madame Delacroix. "I have verified them," she said. Her voice was neutral and precise, with a faint French accent. "All of them. The documentation is complete. The chain of authorization is unambiguous." She looked at Harry with something he thought might be, beneath the professionalism, a kind of controlled fury. "Mr. Potter, what was done to you, and to 17 years of accumulated inheritance, is the most thoroughly documented case of magical theft, fraudulent guardianship, and institutional abuse I have encountered in 22 years of working for the Confederation. Every I is dotted. Every T is crossed. Whoever made sure this documentation trail was preserved," her eyes moved, briefly, to Ragnarok, "was extremely thorough." Ragnarok said nothing. He folded his hands on the table. "What will the Confederation do?" Harry asked. "What we do," Madame Delacroix said, "is forward the verified report to the relevant national authority for immediate legal action. In Britain, that is the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, under Director Amelia Bones. She received our package this morning." She checked the slim silver watch on her wrist. 3 hours ago. Harry thought about this. "Dumbledore doesn't know yet," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Ragnarok said. "He does not." Harry looked at the old goblin across the table. "You planned this," he said. "The timing. The anonymous tip, if there was one. Bringing in the Confederation before going to the British Ministry. All of it." Ragnarok met his eyes. Goblins were not, as a rule, given to warmth. But something moved in his ancient face that Harry thought might, at a significant stretch, be called respect. Gringotts is bound by treaty to report financial crimes of this magnitude, Ragnarok said. We are not bound by any treaty to report them first to the institution that is run by the man who committed them. Smart, Harry said. Yes, Ragnarok said. They spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork. Harry signed documents with a quill that pricked his thumb before each signature, confirming the blood that had opened the vaults. He signed claim documents for all 6 houses. He signed a temporary management agreement that allowed Gringotts to maintain the accounts while the legal situation resolved. He was given a ring, or rather, 6 rings, which the goblin somehow collapsed into a single ring through a process that Harry didn't entirely follow, dark metal set with stones that each bore a different crest, and when it settled onto his right index finger it felt warm. Like it had been waiting. At some point a tray of food appeared beside him, actual food, not toast and not Dudley's leftovers, but a proper lunch of things that were warm and had flavor, and he ate without stopping signing because Sharprock had assured him the documents would wait, but his stomach was a more pressing authority. Madame Delacroix, he noticed, watched him eat with an expression she was very carefully keeping neutral. You're thinking about the Dursleys, he said, not looking up from the document he was signing. I'm thinking, she said carefully, about the condition of a child whose accounts were cleaned out before he was old enough to know accounts existed. Don't feel bad about it, Harry said. I don't. He looked up then, met her eyes. I feel angry about it. There's a difference. She held his gaze. Yes, she said quietly. There is. At the end of the 2 hours, Ragnarok slid one final scroll across the table. This one was shorter than the others, just a single page, and at the top it read, in plain language that required no legal training to understand, official recognition of Lord Harry James Potter Peveril Black Gryffindor Slytherin Hufflepuff Ravenclaw, head of 7 ancient and noble houses, dated this 31st day of July. Harry signed it. The quill didn't even need to prick him this time, it seemed to know him by now. The runes on the walls of the room flared once, gold and silver and something older than both, and then went quiet. It is done, Ragnarok said. Welcome to your inheritance, Lord Potter. Harry said. Just Harry is fine. Ragnarok inclined his head very slightly. Harry. They walked him back up through the bank, but a different way, through the main hall, through the public floor, past the teller counters where goblins were working in their usual frenetic efficiency. Except that they weren't, quite. They were working, yes, but they were also watching him. Every goblin in that hall. Not with hostility and not with the contemptuous indifference they usually showed toward human customers. Watching him the way people watch something that matters. He was nearly at the door when it happened. One of the older tellers, ancient even by goblin standards, with a face like a cliff face, straightened from his counter and gave a short, stiff bow. The kind of bow that looked like it might have hurt, physiologically, but happened anyway. Then the goblin next to him did the same. Then the next. It spread down the hall like dominoes falling, every goblin behind every counter, a wave of those small stiff bows, and the noise of the bank, the clink of coins, the scratch of quills, the incomprehensible banking chatter, went quiet for just a moment, and in that moment Harry could hear his own heartbeat. He stopped walking. He didn't know why. But it felt wrong to walk through something like this. He turned to face the hall, and all those old sharp goblin faces looked back at him, and he thought about 4 billion galleons and 31 empty vaults and 17 years of a life lived in a cupboard under the stairs, and he stood up straight, which took about half a second of conscious effort because 11 years of trying to be invisible had done structural damage, and he said, clearly, to the room, thank you. Not for the bowing. For the audit. For the anonymous report. For the 3 weeks of international maneuvering that had put Madame Delacroix in that room before anyone with reason to stop her could get in the way. Ragnarok, behind him, said nothing. But Harry heard the old goblin's feet stop moving, and he thought, he wasn't certain, but he thought, that was the sound of someone standing a little straighter too. He stepped out onto the white marble steps of Gringotts into the noise and sun of Diagon Alley, and it was just Diagon Alley, busy, bright, smelling of potion ingredients and warm bread from the bakery 3 shops down, full of witches and wizards going about their Tuesday business, none of whom had any idea yet what had happened in the building behind him. The Confederation's report was with Amelia Bones. The clock was running. Harry stood on the steps and looked at the alley spread out in front of him, the place that was apparently his, in some political and financial sense that still felt slightly abstract, and turned the ring on his finger once, feeling the warm metal. He thought about the letter in his sock. Tell no one. Your life may depend on it. He'd told no one. And his life, as far as he could tell, was currently doing the best it had ever done, which, granted, was not a high bar, but still. He needed robes. He needed books. He had a Hogwarts letter arriving at Privet Drive sometime soon and, he now knew, approximately 4 billion galleons sitting in 31 vaults that were actively being restored to his name, plus whatever remained in the trust vault that Dumbledore apparently hadn't thought worth emptying. He walked down the steps and into Diagon Alley. He bought robes first. Not the second-hand ones he'd been vaguely planning on. He walked into Madame Malkin's and asked for the best she had, and when she looked at him, this scruffy, small, plainly dressed boy, he slid the Gringotts account card across the counter that Sharprock had pressed into his hand as he left, and she looked at the name on the card, and she went slightly pale, and then she measured him with extraordinary care and didn't once suggest he might want to consider the budget range. The ring on his finger caught the light once while she was measuring his arm. She glanced at it, recognized the crests, and said nothing at all. Her hands were shaking slightly. He got books next. He spent 45 minutes in Flourish and Blots, picking up the Hogwarts standard list and then, on impulse, everything he could find on wizarding law, inheritance law, the history of the Wizengamot, and the International Confederation of Wizards. The stack came to 37 books and the shop assistant nearly fell over carrying it to the counter. He found a wizarding trunk, self-expanding, with 5 compartments and a lock that responded to his thumbprint, and bought it without looking at the price. He found an owl, which was not something he'd been planning on, but the owl found him first, dropping from a perch in the magical menagerie to land on his shoulder with the proprietary air of someone who has made a decision, and she was small and slightly scrappy-looking and she reminded him of himself enough that he bought her immediately and named her on the spot. Athena. Because she looked like she knew everything and was not going to tell him unless he asked nicely. He was standing in the middle of Diagon Alley with his new trunk shrunk to pocket size, Athena on his shoulder, a bag of owl treats, and the slow dawning realization that he was going to have to go back to Privet Drive at least one more time, to collect his few actual possessions and, he supposed, to tell the Dursleys something, though he was still working out exactly what, when Athena's head snapped up. She'd caught something. Not a smell, an owl thing, some sense he didn't have. She looked toward the entrance of the alley. Harry followed her gaze. A woman was walking fast through the crowd with the kind of purposeful urgency that made people step out of her way without quite knowing why. She was in her 50s, with steel-gray hair pinned back with aggressive practicality, and she was wearing ministry robes with a director's badge catching the sunlight, and her face was the face of someone who had been awake since 3 in the morning reading a very disturbing document and had come here with a very clear idea of what she needed to do next. She was heading for Gringotts. Harry watched Amelia Bones climb the marble steps of the bank he'd just left and disappear through the bronze doors, and Athena settled more firmly on his shoulder, and Harry smiled. The clock, he thought, was definitely running. He went back to Privet Drive. The house was quiet when he got back, Vernon at work, Dudley at his friend Pierce's house, Petunia in the kitchen with the radio on. He went upstairs, collected his few actual things from Dudley's old room, the photographs he'd found of his parents tucked behind a loose baseboard 3 years ago and kept hidden ever since, a library book he'd been meaning to return that he now never would, the spare pair of glasses he'd fixed with spellotape, and the small carved stone he'd found in the garden when he was 6 and kept because it had felt important, which it now occurred to him might actually be something. He put everything in the trunk. It all fit easily in one compartment, which told him something about the quantity of things 11 years of the Dursleys had allowed him to accumulate. He went downstairs. Petunia was at the kitchen sink, her back to the door, and she turned when she heard his feet on the tile, and she looked at him the way she always looked at him, that combination of guilt and resentment and something she never let become anything more, and then she looked at the trunk in his hand and the owl on his shoulder and something shifted in her expression. "You're leaving," she said. "Not today," Harry said. "But soon. A few things have to sort themselves out first." Petunia turned back to the sink. "I suppose you found out, then." Harry went very still. "Found out what?" "That she stopped. Her hands gripped the edge of the sink. "That there was money. That Dumbledore told us there was money, for your care, from your parents' estate, and that a longer stop. That Vernon felt entitled. Given the trouble. Given what it cost us. To have you." Harry looked at the back of her head for a long moment. He thought about what he was feeling and decided it wasn't worth the time it would take to feel it properly right now. "How much?" he asked. "I don't know exactly. It came quarterly. In cash, left on the doorstep. Vernon managed it." She didn't turn around. "I don't know how much. I never asked." Harry nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I'm going to need to know," he said. "Eventually. The goblins will want to know, for the accounting." She said nothing. "Aunt Petunia," Harry said, and something in his voice, not anger, not accusation, just a flatness that was more honest than either, made her hands tighten on the sink edge. "Did you know what he was?" "Dumbledore?" "I knew he was important," she said carefully. "In your world. Did you know what he did to my family's money?" "No." A pause. "I knew what he did to yours. To your life here. I understood we were the arrangement he'd made. I didn't ask what other arrangements he'd made because I didn't want to know." Another pause, longer. "I'm not going to apologize, Harry. I'm not capable of it. But I'm not going to lie to you about it either." Harry thought about this. It was, he decided, more honesty than he'd ever gotten from Petunia Dursley in his entire life. He wasn't going to call it good or bad. It was just what it was. "Okay," he said. He turned and walked to the door. "Harry." Her voice, from behind him, was strained. Not emotional, just strained, like a board under too much weight. "Be careful. Whatever's happening, be careful." He looked back. She still hadn't turned around. "I will," he said. He went upstairs to wait. Athena settled on the windowsill and watched the street with her bright, knowing eyes. Harry lay on the bed that had been Dudley's and looked at the ceiling and listened to the alley he'd left behind, the movement, the activity, Amelia Bones and Gringotts with the report, the clock running down. He didn't know exactly what was going to happen in the next 24 hours. But he knew that somewhere in London, an exhausted woman with a director's badge was reading goblin documentation that had been prepared with the care of people who had been waiting 17 years to hand it to exactly the right person. And he knew that Albus Dumbledore, wherever he was currently having a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Harry closed his eyes. Outside, Athena hooted once, softly, and went quiet. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow everything changes. He slept better than he had in 11 years. Chapter 2, The Arrest. Amelia Bones had not slept. This was not unusual. Insomnia was practically a job requirement for the Director of Magical Law Enforcement, but the particular quality of this sleeplessness was different from the ordinary kind. The ordinary kind came from caseloads and politics and the grinding bureaucratic friction of running a department that was perpetually underfunded, understaffed, and under pressure from a minister who preferred his problems solved quietly and his paperwork minimal. This sleeplessness came from sitting at her kitchen table at 3 in the morning with a goblin-sealed dossier open in front of her, a cup of tea that had gone cold 2 hours ago, and the slow, building certainty that she was holding something that could burn the wizarding world to its foundations. She'd received the package by goblin courier at midnight. The courier, not an owl, an actual goblin in traveling robes, which was so unprecedented that her wards had nearly hexed him before she intervened, had handed her a case the size of a hatbox, sealed with 7 different charms that each required a blood key to open, and said, without preamble, "High Chief Ragnarok sends his regards, Director. He asks that you read everything before you act, and that you act before noon tomorrow." Then the goblin had left, and Amelia had sat down, and she had read everything. It took 4 hours. Not because she was slow, Amelia Bones was many things, and slow was not among them, but because the documentation was exhaustive. Centuries of vault records. Authorization trails. Proxy registrations. The forensic accounting was the kind of work that required both wizarding and goblin expertise to produce, and it showed, every figure cross-referenced, every claim supported by at minimum 3 independent sources, the whole thing constructed with the deliberate, load-bearing solidity of something built to survive a legal challenge. She reached the final page, a single sheet listing 31 vaults, their original contents, their current states, and the name of the individual whose authorizations had emptied them, and she set it down very carefully on the table, the way you set down something fragile. Then she picked up her quill, pulled a fresh sheet of parchment toward her, and began making a list. The list had 2 columns. The first column was, what I need to verify independently before I act. The second column was, what I need to do when I've verified it. The first column had 11 items. By 9 in the morning, she had verified all 11. She went to Gringotts herself, because some things you didn't delegate. Ragnarok was expecting her. Of course he was. The man had choreographed this entire sequence with the patience of someone who had been planning it for, she was beginning to suspect, the better part of a decade. He was sitting at the head of his stone table with Sharprock on his right and Madame Delacroix, who looked like she'd also been awake all night, but unlike Amelia wore it with the practiced composure of someone accustomed to international time zones, on his left. "Director Bones," Ragnarok said. "High Chief," Amelia said. She sat without being invited, because she was 53 years old and tired, and this was not a social call. "I've read your documentation. And it's the most comprehensively damning piece of financial forensics I've ever held in my hands, which is saying something because I've spent 30 years in law enforcement." She put her hands flat on the table. "I need to ask you one question before we go any further." "Ask." "Is there anything in those 31 vaults, anything Dumbledore moved, anything he used, anything connected to the contents, that touches on the defeat of Voldemort?" She said the name without flinching, a habit she'd maintained through the war as a matter of principle. "Because if the answer to that is yes, I need to know now, before I move, so that I understand exactly what I'm dismantling." Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. It was the quiet of someone choosing their words with precision. "The method by which Voldemort was defeated in 1981 is, to our knowledge, entirely independent of any vault contents," he said. "Lily Potter's sacrifice was a piece of ancient magic, not an artifact. It left a protection in the boy's blood, not in any physical object." A pause. "What Dumbledore stored in various vaults, our vaults, and specifically in Vault 713, in the years following 1981 is a separate matter. Those items were not instrumental in Voldemort's defeat. They were placed there afterward, for reasons of Dumbledore's own." "Vault 713, Amelia said. "That's not on my list." "No," Ragnarok said. "Because Vault 713 is not a Potter vault. It is a Gringotts-held vault rented by Dumbledore under his own name. Its contents are not part of the inheritance theft. They are, however." He paused again, and this pause had a different quality, careful and deliberate, relevant to a number of other questions that you will shortly find yourself needing to ask. Amelia looked at him. "Are you going to tell me what's in it?" "When the time is appropriate," Ragnarok said. "First, the arrest." Amelia sat with that for a moment. Then she nodded, once. "First, the arrest," she agreed. She had 12 hours. She spent them with surgical efficiency. First, she pulled Dawlish and 3 senior aurors, Shacklebolt, Tonks, and Proudfoot, and briefed them without context, telling them only that they were executing an arrest warrant at the Wizengamot at noon and that she needed absolute discretion until they were in the room. Shacklebolt didn't ask questions, which was why she'd chosen him. Tonks asked one question: is it dangerous? And when Amelia said, not physically, she nodded and said, right then, and that was that. Dawlish looked uncomfortable, which was his default expression, and she brought him mostly because he was senior enough to give the operation institutional weight and inexperienced enough not to have formed allegiances she'd need to worry about. Second, she sent a sealed letter, blood-sealed, Confederation standard, impervious to interception by Ministry owls or flu monitoring, to the International Confederation's office in Geneva, notifying them that she was proceeding with the action and that British DMLE was acting in compliance with Protocol 7. The response came back in 11 minutes, Confederation concurs. Observer Delacroix will be present. Proceedings to be formally recorded under international treaty. Third, and this was the part that made her pause, she went to see Cornelius Fudge. Not to ask permission. She had a legal warrant, she didn't need his permission. She went to inform him, as a professional courtesy, and to look at his face when she told him. His face, when she told him, went through 6 distinct shades of color in approximately 4 seconds, white, then green, then an alarming red, then white again, then a complicated puce, then something she'd classify as resignation. Amelia, he said, very carefully, when he'd gotten his face under control. You understand what this will do? Yes, she said. The public, Dumbledore is, he's trusted, Amelia. He's the symbol of, he emptied 31 vaults belonging to a child whose parents he helped put in the ground, Amelia said, keeping her voice level. He collected quarterly cash payments from the child's abusive guardians, presumably as a management fee for the arrangement. He has, for 17 years, controlled the political and financial destiny of a minor heir without that heir's knowledge or consent. She picked up her hat from the chair. With respect, Minister, the public's feelings about Albus Dumbledore are not my department. She walked out before he could say anything else. The Wizengamot was in session. It met on the first and third Tuesday of every month for routine business, minor legislation, small criminal cases, the endless bureaucratic maintenance of a society organized around magic. The July session was never particularly dramatic. Summer recess was approaching. Most of the senior Wizengamot members were thinking about their estates in the country, their holiday travel, the upcoming international Quidditch fixtures. Albus Dumbledore was in his seat in the Chief Warlock's chair at the head of the chamber, wearing his usual magnificent robes, purple today, with silver moons, presiding over a debate about cauldron thickness regulations with the benign, half-attentive air of a man who was currently thinking about several other things simultaneously. He had a lemon drop in his cheek. He was half-smiling. He looked, Harry Potter would later think, watching the memory through a pensieve, like a man without a single enemy in the world. Amelia Bones walked in at 12:02 p.m. with Shacklebolt, Tonks, Proudfoot, and Dawlish at her back, and Madame Delacroix of the International Confederation at her side, and the chamber went quiet the way chambers go quiet when something has entered that doesn't belong to the ordinary order of things. She walked to the center of the floor. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, she said, clearly and precisely, I am placing you under arrest on behalf of the British Department of Magical Law Enforcement, in cooperation with the International Confederation of Wizards, under the authority of Protocol 7 of the Magical Inheritance Treaty of 1689. She held up the warrant. The charges include 31 counts of vault theft under the Goblin Banking Statutes of 1752, fraudulent assumption of magical guardianship, fraudulent assumption of proxy power of attorney, 31 counts of misappropriation of trust funds belonging to a minor magical heir, suppression of lawful house lordship, bribery of ministry officials, and conspiracy to circumvent the International Magical Treaty on the Rights of Heirs. The chamber was absolutely silent. Dumbledore had not moved. He was still sitting in the Chief Warlock's chair, still half-smiling, still with the lemon drop in his cheek. His blue eyes, above the half-moon spectacles, were fixed on Amelia with an expression she couldn't read. Not shock. Not fear. Something that looked almost like sadness. "Amelia," he said, gently. "I think there may be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," she said. "A beat. May I ask who?" "Gringotts conducted an internal audit," she said. "The documentation is complete. I have spent 12 hours verifying it independently. There is no misunderstanding, Albus." She used his first name deliberately, because she wanted him to understand that this was not impersonal. She had known this man since she was a student. She had fought alongside his order in the war. She had respected him for 30 years. She was arresting him anyway. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he rose from the chief warlock's chair. He placed his wand on the arm of the chair, the traditional surrender gesture, so old it predated the ministry itself, and he said, quietly enough that only she heard it, "I hope, when everything is examined, that the reasons become clear." "They'll get a chance to become clear," Amelia said. "In a trial." She nodded to Shacklebolt, who came forward and placed the binding charm with the efficient professionalism that was his particular gift. Dumbledore stood still throughout. The chamber erupted. Gringotts had, at Harry's request, relayed through Sharprock that morning, set up a viewing mirror in a small private room off the main hall. The mirror was linked to a magical observer that Madame Delacroix had placed in the Wizengamot gallery, capturing everything in real time, the sound clean and clear. Harry watched all of it. He sat in the small stone room with a cup of tea that Sharprock had placed at his elbow without comment, and Athena on the back of his chair, and he watched Amelia Bones walk into the Wizengamot chamber and arrest the most powerful wizard in Britain with 12 words and a warrant. He watched Dumbledore rise from his chair. He watched the wand placed on the armrest, the old deliberate gesture, practiced, composed, entirely characteristic of a man who understood symbolism. He watched Shacklebolt's binding charm. He watched the chamber erupt, Wizengamot members on their feet, shouting, some at Amelia and some at each other, a woman in the front row who appeared to be crying, a man in the back who was laughing, though Harry couldn't tell if it was funny or hysterical or both. He watched Dumbledore walk out of the chamber between Shacklebolt and Tonks, and even then, even under arrest, even in the midst of a catastrophic public scene, the old man moved with a kind of dignified composure that Harry found, despite himself, reluctantly impressive. When the mirror went dark, Harry sat for a moment in the quiet room. He was not celebrating. It didn't feel like something to celebrate. It felt like the end of a very long holding of breath. Like when a wound you've been ignoring for years finally gets properly looked at, and you're relieved but also slightly horrified by how bad it actually was. Athena butted her head against his ear. He reached up and scratched behind her beak without thinking about it. "Right," he said to her. "What's next?" Athena made a sound that was not quite a hoot. "More of an opinion." Sharprock appeared in the doorway. "Lord Potter. Your legal team is here." Harry stood up. "I have a legal team. As of this morning. Gringotts retained them on your behalf pending your agreement. They are among the best wizarding barristers in Britain." A slight pause. "They are aware of the full situation." Harry followed Sharprock back through the corridor to the main conference room, and the three people waiting for him there were not what he'd expected, though he wasn't entirely sure what he'd expected. A woman in her mid-40s, dark-skinned, with natural hair pinned up and the focused energy of someone who had been waiting for the interesting case of her career, Barrister Celestine Ward, Sharprock introduced her, specialist in inheritance law and wizarding treaty violations. A man of about 60, white-haired and compact, with the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades being underestimated, Edmund Cross, specialist in criminal procedure and Wizengamot protocol. And a younger woman, perhaps 30, with a quick nervous energy that resolved, when you paid attention, into a sharp analytical intelligence that missed nothing, Priya Sharma, specialist in international wizarding law and confederation procedure. Harry looked at them. They looked at him. "I'm Harry," he said. We know, Ward said, and she had a warm directness that Harry liked immediately. Sit down. We have a lot to cover and not much time, because the world is about to get very loud about you and it's better to be prepared. Harry sat. Athena settled on the back of his chair with the proprietary air she'd apparently decided was her signature move. How bad is it going to get? Harry asked. Ward opened her briefcase. By tonight, every newspaper in Britain will have the story. By tomorrow morning, international papers. By the end of the week, there will be not less than 17 political factions trying to claim you as their symbol, 4 ministry departments trying to assert jurisdiction over your affairs, at least 2 foreign governments sending official letters, and 1 particularly enterprising journalist who will attempt to interview your owl. She said all of this with the calm of someone reading a shopping list. What do we do about it? Harry asked. We get ahead of it, Cross said. Which means we establish, clearly and immediately, that you are not available to be claimed by anyone, that your affairs are managed exclusively through Gringotts and your legal team, and that any attempt to contact you outside of those channels will be treated as harassment of a minor under wizarding law. He folded his hands. We also need to discuss your living situation. I'm at Privet Drive, Harry said. Temporarily. You should not be there at all, Sharma said. As a formally recognized lord of 6 houses, you have residences. Several, in fact. The Potter family properties include a house in Godric's Hollow, currently sealed, a manor in the Scottish Highlands, and a town property in Edinburgh. The Black family properties, are there any of them that aren't crime scenes or currently falling apart? Harry asked. Sharma blinked. Then smiled. The Edinburgh property is in good condition. Sealed since your parents' deaths but maintained under automatic charms. It's fully furnished. Can I go there tonight? With some paperwork, yes. Then let's do that paperwork, Harry said. Ward was watching him with something that was trying not to be amusement. Lord Potter, Harry. Harry. You're 11. I know, Harry said. Is that a problem? No, Ward said, after a moment. No, I don't think it is. They spent 3 hours in that room. Harry signed more things, asked more questions, and discovered, incrementally, through the careful precision of his legal team, the full map of what he'd inherited. The properties, 12, across Britain and 2 abroad, a small villa in southern France that had apparently belonged to the Peveril line and sat empty for 200 years. The political holdings, 7 Wizengamot seats, enough to form a bloc with veto power over most ordinary legislation. The financial holdings, the 4 billion in stolen funds was being recovered through a legal instrument Gringotts had filed simultaneously with the arrest warrant, freezing the proxy accounts and beginning the process of restoration. There was also, untouched, a separate Potter investment portfolio managed entirely by Gringotts that had been quietly growing for 17 years and now sat at approximately 500 million galleons additional. The artifact collections, Ward set a separate folder on top of the others and said they'd deal with this later because it was complicated and some of the items might require consultation with the Department of Mysteries. At some point Sharprock brought food again. Harry ate a beef sandwich and kept reading. He was halfway through a property deed for the Scottish manor when Cross cleared his throat. There's one more thing, Cross said, that we need to discuss today. Harry set down the deed. Sirius Black. Cross looked at him. You knew. Ragnarok mentioned his name yesterday. His vault was one of the 31. You said I'm his heir. He's in Azkaban for something, I don't know exactly what, but given everything else that's happened, I'm starting to think the story I might have heard, if I'd heard any story at all, which I haven't because no one's told me anything, might not be the whole truth. Cross placed a folder on the table. Thin, this one. Sirius Orion Black was convicted of the murder of 13 muggles and a wizard named Peter Pettigrew in 1981. He was sentenced to life in Azkaban without trial. Harry looked up from the folder. Without a trial. Without a trial, Cross confirmed, and there was a particular flatness in his voice that Harry recognized as the sound of a lawyer making a statement so damning that commentary would be redundant. That can't be legal, Harry said. Even I know that's not legal. It is not, Cross said. It was also sanctioned, quietly, by the then chief warlock of the Wizengamot, who persuaded the minister of the time that a trial would be unnecessarily destabilizing. Given the public mood. Harry thought about who had been chief warlock of the Wizengamot in 1981. He thought about the lemon drop, and the purple robes, and the wand placed on the armrest with such dignified composure. Right, he said. What do we do? We file an emergency petition for a Wizengamot review of the conviction, Cross said. On the grounds that the original sentencing violated fundamental wizarding law. Given the current climate, with Dumbledore's arrest making the evening papers, I believe we will find the Wizengamot unusually receptive to the petition. File it today, Harry said. It's already drafted, Cross said. I just needed your authorization. Harry signed it. The quill barely needed to touch the parchment before it was moving, as if it had been waiting too. He left Gringotts at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The alley had changed in the 7 hours since he'd been here that morning. Not physically, the shops were the same, the cobblestones, the smell of potions and old books and warm bread. But the atmosphere had shifted in the way that atmospheres shift when information is moving through a community at speed. Groups of people were clustered in the middle of the street, talking in the urgent half-whispered way of people who have just heard something that might be true but can't quite believe it is. The Witch Weekly stand near the entrance had a hastily charmed banner across its front that read, "Breaking, Dumbledore arrested, full story inside." The Prophet stand next to it had already updated twice, the headline shifting every few minutes, the latest version reading, "Potter heir located, International Confederation involvement confirmed." A few people recognized him. Not many. He was small and plainly dressed and his fame was mostly theoretical, built on a legend attached to an infant rather than anything connected to the actual 11-year-old in front of them, but a few. An older witch who stopped walking entirely and stared. A young boy about Harry's age who tugged his father's sleeve and pointed. A wizard in ministry robes who looked at him, then looked away very quickly, then walked much faster. Harry kept walking. Athena was in her carrier, he'd bought one, a lightweight wicker thing that she tolerated with minimum grace, and his trunk was in his pocket, shrunk. He had the Edinburgh address on a piece of paper in his hand. He was almost to the leaky cauldron when someone caught his arm. Not grabbed, caught. Lightly, carefully, the way you stop someone to talk rather than to prevent them from leaving. He turned. The woman was small, round-faced, wearing a purple cardigan despite the summer warmth, with a pad of paper in one hand and a quick quotes quill in the other. She had the bright acquisitive eyes of someone who spotted stories the way cats spot birds. Rita Skeeter. He'd learn the name later. At this point he just saw the quick quotes quill and understood instinctively what that meant. Lord Potter, she said, smiling the kind of smile that was simultaneously warm and hungry. Rita Skeeter, Daily Prophet. I wonder if you'd know, Harry said pleasantly. Have a few moments to know, Harry said again. But I'll tell you this, Gringotts will be issuing an official statement tomorrow morning. So will my legal team. What's in those statements is accurate. What isn't in those statements? He looked at the quick quotes quill, which was already moving, writing something he hadn't said, whatever that thing is writing right now, isn't. He reached out, gently but firmly, and took the quill from the air. Held it. There'll be time for proper interviews later, Ms. Skeeter. Today's a bad day for it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the quill in his hand, which had gone still. Then back at him. You're 11, she said. Everyone keeps saying that, Harry said. He handed the quill back. Tomorrow. The official statements. I think you'll find they're enough to work with. She watched him go. He heard her say something to herself as he pushed through the leaky cauldron door, but he didn't catch it. It sounded something like, well, then. The Edinburgh house was on a quiet, tree-lined street that existed in the particular way that wizarding buildings exist in Muggle cities, present and absent simultaneously, findable if you knew what you were looking for, invisible if you didn't. It was narrow and 4 stories tall, built of the same dark stone as most of Edinburgh's old town, and it looked like it had been waiting. The wards recognized his blood before he touched the door. He felt them come awake as he stepped onto the front path, a subtle thing, like the house taking a breath, and the lock turned on its own before his hand reached it. Inside, it was dark and dusty but not damaged. The furniture was under preservation charms, still whole, still good. A small parlor on the ground floor with chairs that looked comfortable. A kitchen. A library on the second floor, smaller than the Hogwarts one would turn out to be, but containing things the Hogwarts one certainly didn't. A study. 3 bedrooms. And on the top floor, a room that appeared to have been a workroom of some kind, with rune-carved benches and shelves that still held half-full jars of ingredients and tools Harry didn't yet have names for. He found a bedroom that felt right, 3rd floor, window overlooking the back garden, the street beyond, and put his trunk down. Let Athena out of her carrier. She flew immediately to the windowsill, looked out at the Edinburgh evening with evident satisfaction, and made the sound that he was coming to recognize as approval. "Yeah," Harry said, looking around the room. "This is better." He sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firmer than Dudley's hand-me-down. The room smelled like old stone and something faintly botanical, some herb or other from the workroom above that had had 17 years to seep through the ceiling. His room. His house. His city, technically. He pulled out his new books and stacked them on the floor because there was no bookshelf yet, and he picked the one on Wizengamot procedure, because that seemed most immediately useful, and he opened it, and he read until the Edinburgh sky outside went dark and the street lamps came on, gold in the summer night. At some point he ate, there was food in the kitchen, magically preserved, still good, and at some point he went back to reading, and at some point past midnight he set the book aside and lay in the dark with his eyes open, thinking about Sirius Black in Azkaban. 12 years for something he possibly didn't do, for a crime investigated by a system run by the man who'd had reasons to see him stay there. He thought about Amelia Bones walking into that chamber with her 12 words and her warrant. He thought about Ragnarok setting this whole sequence in motion, every piece placed with the patience of someone playing a very long game. He thought about tomorrow. The newspapers. The statements. The world getting very loud, the way Ward had promised it would. He was not afraid of any of it. That was the thing he kept coming back to, in the quiet of the Edinburgh house, the thing he turned over and couldn't quite explain. He'd spent 11 years trying to be small, trying to be invisible, trained by the Dursley's systematic pressure to shrink himself down to something that didn't inconvenience anyone. He'd been, not afraid, not exactly, but careful. Aware of his edges. Aware of what space he was and wasn't allowed to take up. And now he was lord of 6 houses in his own house with 4 billion galleons being recovered in his name, and Albus Dumbledore was spending his first night under ministry supervision, and Sirius Black's emergency petition was already filed, and Harry Potter, the boy from the cupboard, from the garden shed, from the second-hand robes and the electrical tape on his shoe, was exactly as angry as he'd always had reason to be and exactly as free as he'd never been allowed to become. He fell asleep somewhere in that thought. Outside, Edinburgh went quiet. Athena watched the dark street and kept her own counsel, and the house held its breath around its returned lord, and everything waited for morning. Morning came with a bang. Not metaphorically. An actual bang, Athena's warning hoot, immediately followed by a volley of owls hitting the front window with enough force to rattle the glass, a cascade of letters dropping through the mail slot, and someone pounding on the front door with the urgency of someone who had been waiting outside since what Harry estimated, squinting at the light, was approximately 6 in the morning. He went downstairs in his clothes from the previous day because he didn't yet have anything else, and he opened the front door. Augusta Longbottom was not a small woman. She was tall, thin, sharp-boned, wearing black traveling robes and a hat with a stuffed vulture on it that was aggressive even by the standards of aggressive hats, and she was holding a letter with the Gringotts seal, a different letter from Harry's, this one clearly very fresh, and her expression was that of someone who has spent all night moving from shock to fury and has arrived at fury and intends to stay there. Behind her, slightly to the left, was a boy Harry's age, round-faced, with an expression that suggested he had been told something significant this morning and hadn't fully finished processing it yet. "Lord Potter," Augusta Longbottom said, in the voice of someone who has decided that time spent on social niceties is time wasted. "I am Augusta Longbottom. I received a letter from Gringotts this morning regarding my grandson's inheritance." She held the letter up. "It appears our situations are connected. I believe we need to talk." Harry looked at the letter, then at Augusta, then at the boy behind her. "You must be Neville," he said. The boy's eyebrows went up. "You know who I am?" "You're on my list," Harry said. Which was true. Cross had included a brief note about connected inheritance cases, the Longbottom vaults touched by peripheral arrangements connected to the Dumbledore proxy. He hadn't had time to read it in detail yet. "Come in. I'll put the kettle on." Augusta blinked. Whatever she'd expected from 11-year-old Harry Potter, it apparently wasn't an immediate invitation to tea. She came in anyway. Chapter 3, The Boy Who Owns Everything. Augusta Longbottom had been in a great many important houses. She'd been in the ministry's formal reception rooms, in the old black family townhouse before it fell to disrepair, in the Malfoy Manor's gilded front parlor twice during diplomatic functions she'd attended as a gesture of political good faith that she'd regretted both times. She knew what old money looked like, what it felt like, how it arranged itself in a room. The Edinburgh house had that quality. Stripped of its dust sheets now, Harry had pulled them off the night before with a kind of efficient practicality that reminded her, uncomfortably, of certain portraits she'd seen of James Potter. The parlor was all dark wood and deep colors, books spine out on shelves, a fireplace that lit when Harry walked past it, apparently recognizing him on some elemental level. The furniture was good. Old good, not expensive, recently good. The kind of furniture that had held 5 generations of the same family and intended to hold 5 more. She sat in one of the chairs without being asked. Neville sat next to her, watching Harry move around the kitchen that opened off the parlor with the careful attention of someone calibrating a situation they haven't been given enough information about yet. "Gringotts sent you a letter this morning," Harry said from the kitchen. The sound of water. The particular pop of a gas hob igniting, Muggle style, Harry noted, which meant either a previous Potter had a taste for Muggle conveniences or the house had been set up at some point for extended Muggle interaction. What did it say? That my grandson's vault, the Longbottom Family Trust Vault, established for Neville at his birth, was subject to a secondary authorization registered by Albus Dumbledore in 1982. Augusta's voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something that Harry recognized as the specific fury of someone who has discovered they trusted the wrong person. The authorization was used 5 times over the following decade to withdraw sums ranging from 50 to 200 galleons. The total extracted is approximately 800 galleons. "That's not much," Harry said, coming back with 2 cups of tea and a glass of water for Neville. He sat across from them. "Comparatively. Why did they send you a letter about it today specifically?" "Because," Augusta said, wrapping her hands around the cup, "the secondary authorization also granted Dumbledore advisory status over Neville's magical education plan." She paused. Advisory status, under the Wizarding Minors Protection Act, gives a registered advisor the right to recommend specific suppressive treatments in cases of. She stopped. Breathed. Continued. "In cases of what the Act calls developmental instability." Harry looked at Neville. Neville was looking at his water glass. His jaw was set in the particular way of someone holding something very still because if they let it move it will get away from them. "They suppressed your magic," Harry said. Neville looked up. I had a block," he said, carefully. "Gran always thought it was natural. Some kids develop more slowly." She said. He stopped and looked at Augusta. Augusta was not looking at him. She was looking at the fireplace. "I believed," she said quietly, that the block was constitutional. That Neville was simply a late developer. I was told, by Dumbledore, at Frank and Alice's memorial service in 1982, that given the trauma of the night they were, given what happened to them, it was natural for Neville to have some magical instability. He recommended a pediatric healer at St. Mungo's. A pause. That healer's name appears in the Gringotts documentation as a recipient of 2 payments from the proxy account. The fire crackled. Outside, Edinburgh was getting on with its morning, entirely unaware. So he paid someone to put a block on your magic, Harry said to Neville. Not a question. Stating it plainly, because he had found that stating things plainly was the most efficient way to move through situations that other people wanted to make complicated. And then paid your grandmother's healer to tell her it was natural. Yes, Neville said. His voice was steady. Apparently. Why? Harry asked Augusta. Why would he care about Neville's magic? Augusta set her cup down. The Longbottom family holds 2 Wizengamot seats. With my seat, 3. And the Longbottom alliance, historically, tends to go where the Potters go. She met Harry's eyes. A diminished Neville is a Neville who cannot inherit properly. A Neville who cannot inherit properly means the Longbottom Wizengamot seats go into abeyance. Absent seats on the Wizengamot mean less opposition to whatever legislative agenda. He was controlling the votes, Harry said. Through proxies. Through absence. Through kids who couldn't challenge him. Among other methods, yes. Harry sat with that for a moment. 7 Wizengamot seats in his own name. 3 in the Longbottom name. 10 seats, between the 2 of them, that Dumbledore had been effectively neutralizing for over a decade through a combination of financial manipulation, fraudulent medical advice, and the systematic diminishment of the people those seats were meant to belong to. The block, Harry said to Neville. Is it still there? Neville's hand went briefly to his wrist, nervous habit, Harry would learn later, touching the place where a suppression bracelet had been fitted at age 3 and removed only this morning, by a Gringotts cursebreaker who had arrived at Augusta's door at 5 a.m. with the letter and a warrant for the bracelet's immediate confiscation as evidence. They took it off this morning, Neville said. He flexed his fingers. It feels different. Everything feels louder. Like someone turned up a volume I didn't know was turned down. Does it hurt? No. A pause. It feels good, actually. Which is a bit weird. It's not weird, Harry said. That's what you're supposed to feel like. Neville looked at him. Something shifted in his round face, not a dramatic shift, but the small significant kind, the kind that happens when someone says a true thing to you that you needed someone to say. Right, he said, quietly. Yeah. Augusta cleared her throat. The question before us, she said, with the manner of someone redirecting a meeting back to agenda items, is what we intend to do. We intend to join the emergency Wizengamot petition that my legal team filed yesterday, Harry said. I'll have Cross, he's my barrister, specialist in Wizengamot procedure, add the Longbottom case to the evidentiary file. The more documentation, the better. He looked at Augusta. I'd also like to recommend that Neville come to Edinburgh for a few days while the situation settles. It's going to get loud, and your house will be identifiable. This one's warded and the address isn't on any ministry record. Augusta looked at him for a long moment. The vulture on her hat seemed to look at him too. You're 11 years old, she said. Not accusingly. Almost wonderingly. You're the 3rd person to say that to me in 24 hours, Harry said. It keeps being true. Does it change anything about what I just said? Augusta considered. No, she said. It doesn't. She turned to Neville. You'll go. Pack for a week. Gran, Neville. Her voice was gentle in a way that Harry suspected it wasn't often. There are things I need to do in the next few days that require my full attention, and they are made easier by knowing you're somewhere safe and, she glanced at Harry, somewhere useful. Neville looked at Harry. Harry raised his eyebrows slightly, an expression that meant your call. Okay, Neville said. Yeah. Okay. Augusta left at 9 o'clock. Neville stayed, with a bag he'd apparently packed before they'd even arrived, which told Harry something about his level of preparedness and his relationship with spontaneous decisions. They were good at it, being in the same space. Harry hadn't expected that. He'd been around Dudley and Dudley's friends his whole life, and the sensation of being around boys his own age was generally either invisible or unpleasant. But Neville moved through the Edinburgh house with a natural ease, not making himself small, not demanding attention, finding the library on the second floor within 20 minutes and standing in front of the shelves with a focused, slightly reverent expression. You like plants, Harry said from the doorway. Neville glanced at him. How did you? Your bag. I saw the corner of a herbology book sticking out. Oh. Neville turned back to the shelves. Yeah. Always have. Gran says it's a waste of time for a proper wizard, but, he stopped. There's a whole section here on magical botanicals. Like, proper old texts. This one, he pulled a slim volume, careful with it the way you're careful with something you recognize is valuable. This is a first edition Sprout. 1701, is that good? Yes, Neville said, with the simple certainty of someone who doesn't need to perform enthusiasm. It's very good. Take it if you want, Harry said. Neville looked at him. It's yours. It's in my library. I'm going to have 37 more books arriving tomorrow and no shelves to put them on yet. I'm not going to miss a botanical text. He paused. Or you can just read it here. Whatever you prefer. Neville put the book carefully back on the shelf. Here, he said. If that's, I'll read it here. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone making a small, deliberate decision about trust. What's the plan for today? Diagon Alley, Harry said. There are things I need to do in person and I'd rather do them this morning before the afternoon papers. Can I come? That's why I mentioned it in front of you. Diagon Alley at 10 in the morning on the second day after the arrest of Albus Dumbledore was a completely different creature from the Diagon Alley of Harry's first visit. The energy was frenetic, not frightened, not violent, but buzzing with the particular charge of a community processing something enormous and not yet having reached any consensus about what it meant. People stood in clusters outside every shop. The Prophet stand had updated its headline 4 times since dawn, the current version reading, 31 vaults, the full accounting with a subheading that said Potter heir speaks to Gringotts, International Confederation confirms treaty violations. Which weekly had gone full tabloid with a cover that was mostly a question mark next to a picture of Harry from, he had no idea where they'd gotten a picture of him, but there it was, slightly blurry, taken apparently from a distance, showing a small dark-haired boy coming down the Gringotts steps the previous morning. He ignored both stands. Neville walked beside him with the slightly widened eyes of someone experiencing Diagon Alley at considerably higher social stakes than usual. Everyone's looking at you, Neville said, quietly. Yeah, Harry said. Don't make eye contact and walk like you know where you're going. Do you know where you're going? Mostly. He turned left, away from the main shopping stretch, down a narrower side street that most Diagon Alley visitors never bothered with. Here the shops were smaller and less tourist-facing, an apothecary that catered to serious potioneers, a rune carver studio, a small firm of wizarding solicitors with frosted glass in the window. And, at the end of the street, a narrow door with no sign above it that Harry had found in a property registry in Cross's files, the Edinburgh branch of the Potters' traditional solicitors, apparently maintained on a 30-year rolling lease that Dumbledore had somehow missed in his administrative sweep. The woman inside, middle-aged, small, with the look of someone perpetually organized, looked up when they came in. Lord Potter, she said immediately. Her name was Millicent Graves, and the firm's involvement with the Potter account was apparently a matter of considerable personal significance to her, because she stood up very straight and said, "We've been waiting." For how long? Harry asked, taking a seat across from her desk. Since 1981, she said. When the account went quiet and we weren't able to reach the guardians. We suspected something was wrong but, she paused, we were not able to act without authorization from either the guardian or the heir. She placed a folder on the desk. There are several property-related legal matters that have been accumulating. I've organized them by urgency. How long will this take? Harry asked. For signatures. 3 hours. For full review, several sessions. Signatures today, Harry said. Can someone else? He looked at Neville. Oh, I'll just. Neville started to rise. I meant can one of my legal team attend for the review sessions, Harry said. You can stay. You're not in the way. He turned back to Graves. One thing first, before the property documents. Godric's Hollow. Graves' expression shifted. Yes. I want to see it. Before there are more people involved. Is there anything legally preventing me from entering? No. The property belongs to you outright. It was sealed by the ministry after 1981 as a memorial site, but the sealing was temporary and has in fact lapsed. I believe it was a 5-year seal that was never renewed. You can enter any time. Today, Harry said. Graves looked at him. I can have the formal release documents ready in 30 minutes, she said. Then let's start with those. Godric's Hollow was not what Harry had expected, though he hadn't known what he was expecting until he was standing in front of the gate. A village. Small, quiet, mid-morning summer light on the old stone. A church at the center, a war memorial that he'd somehow known would be here without knowing he'd known it, and there, down a lane off the main square, a house that had been rebuilt after its damage, but imperfectly, the way things are rebuilt when they're rebuilt as monuments rather than homes. One wall still bore the shadow of the blast, preserved under a stasis charm. The garden had grown wild. The gate hung on one hinge. They stood outside. Neville, with the sensitivity of someone who has spent a lot of time around loss, said nothing. He just stood there, which was, Harry found, exactly what was needed. Harry pushed the gate open. The inside was quiet. Dusty in the way abandoned places are dusty, not the lived-in dust of the Edinburgh house but the still dust of a place that has been holding its breath for a very long time. The front hall was small. A sitting room to the left. A kitchen at the back. Stairs going up. He went upstairs. The nursery was the room at the end of the landing. The door was already slightly open, the way it might have been left by someone who left in a hurry, or by someone who left and never came back. He pushed it open. There was a cot. Still there, still in the corner. A mobile above it, stars and moons in faded yellow, still turning in the slight draft from the door. A rocking chair. A bookshelf with picture books, bright spines, a duck on one cover, a broomstick on another. And on the wall next to the cot, in the plaster, protected under whatever stasis charm the ministry had placed on the house and then forgotten to renew, a handprint. Small. Child-sized. In something that had dried dark. Harry stood in the doorway for a long time. He felt, it was a complicated feeling, the kind that doesn't have one name. Grief, maybe, but grief for people he didn't remember, which was a particular kind of grief that had no clean edges. Anger, underneath it, still there, always there. And something else. Something that felt like recognition. Like this room had been waiting for him specifically, the way the Edinburgh house had waited, the way the ring on his finger had waited, all of it arranged like a sentence with a subject that was always going to be him. He crouched down next to the cot and opened the small drawer in its base, because it had a drawer and he didn't know why he'd checked but he had. Inside the drawer was a photograph. Not framed. Just a photograph, slightly curled at the edges, the way Muggle photographs curl, because it was Muggle, a Polaroid, the old kind. A woman with red hair and a laughing mouth was sitting in this room, in that rocking chair, holding a very small baby who was grabbing her hair with both fists. The woman was laughing. The baby, he knew the baby, he'd seen him in the bathroom mirror his entire life, looked outraged by his own grip strength, surprised to find himself attached to something. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting he'd never seen before, Lily and Harry, 3 months. He pulled my hair and then looked betrayed. I love him so much it's ridiculous. Harry sat on the floor of the nursery in his parents' house and looked at that handwriting for a long time. He wasn't crying. He was just, looking. The way you look at something you've needed for a long time and finally have. Eventually he stood up, put the photograph carefully in his breast pocket, and went back downstairs. Neville was in the kitchen, having apparently found the old kettle through some instinct, and was boiling water on the muggle hob with the focus of someone who has identified a useful task and is performing it. Tea, he offered. Yeah, Harry said. Thanks. They sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house while the summer moved outside the dirty windows, and they drank their tea, and neither of them said much, and that was exactly right. The afternoon papers were, as promised, loud. Harry and Neville were back in Edinburgh by 2 o'clock. The stack of owls that had accumulated at the front window was staggering, 47 letters by Harry's count, from sources ranging from the Wizengamot to foreign magical governments to what appeared to be a significant portion of the British wizarding public who had decided, based on the morning papers, that they had strong personal feelings about Harry Potter and needed him to know about them. Ward arrived at 3 with Sharma and a satchel full of papers and the expression of someone who has been managing chaos since dawn and is doing so with absolute proficiency and absolutely no enjoyment. The letters fall into 6 categories, she said, sitting down at the kitchen table with the decisive manner of someone who has categorized things and intends to keep them that way. Political correspondence, we respond through formal channels, you don't sign anything yet. Condolence letters from the public, Gringotts has a standard response form, we batch these. Foreign government inquiries, Sharma handles those. She looked at Harry. Media requests, we decline everything for now except one. And legal demands, there are 4, all from parties connected to Dumbledore's financial network, all arguing that the vault restoration constitutes an illegal seizure of legitimately transferred assets. Those are going to lose, Harry said. Catastrophically, Ward confirmed. Don't worry about them. She slid a single envelope across the table. This one I held out separately. It arrived this morning, directly to Gringotts, addressed to you personally. Not through the press. Not through the ministry. She paused. It's from Albus Dumbledore. The kitchen went quiet. Neville looked at the envelope. Harry looked at it too. He's in ministry custody, Harry said. Evidently he still has access to parchment and an owl, Ward said drily. Do you want me to? I'll read it, Harry said. He picked it up. The handwriting was exactly what he'd imagined, elegant, slightly archaic, the hand of someone who'd learned to write in a different era and never quite updated. Dear Harry, I imagine you have many questions. I imagine also that you are angrier than you are allowing anyone to see, which is a quality you inherited from your mother rather than your father, who wore his feelings plainly. I will not insult you by offering justifications in a letter. What I did with reasons I believed were sufficient. I was wrong to believe that my judgment superseded your rights, and I was wrong not to trust you with the truth of your own situation. These are not small wrongs and I will not minimize them. What I will say is this, there are things connected to your inheritance, specifically to the contents of certain vaults, that have implications beyond the financial. Things I managed because I believed they required management by someone who understood them. With my arrest, that management ends. I would ask, not demand, I have forfeited any right to demand, that you speak to Ragnarok before examining the contents of Vault 713. I am sorry, Harry. Not only for the practical harm, though that was considerable. I am sorry that you grew up not knowing what you were, what you had, what was owed to you. You deserved better than what I arranged. Albus Dumbledore. Harry set the letter down. Read it again. Set it down again. Well? Ward said. He's sorry, Harry said. Does it help? Harry thought about the nursery. The mobile turning in the draft. The handprint in the plaster. It's a start, he said. It doesn't change anything, but it's a start. He picked the letter up again, folded it, put it in his pocket with the photograph. Tell Ragnarok I want to visit Vault 713. Tomorrow morning. Ward made a note. And the one media request I held. Who is it? Not Rita Skeeter. A journalist named Harold Finch, from the International Wizarding Review. Serious publication, Confederation adjacent. He's been covering the Vault story since Delacroix filed the Observer report. His editor contacted us with a formal request for a sit-down interview, written questions submitted in advance, fact-checked before publication, no quick quotes quill. Harry considered. What do we get out of it? International narrative control, Sharma said from across the table, looking up from the foreign correspondence she'd been sorting. Right now the story is being written by other people. The British papers are reactive, the foreign papers are speculative. One interview, right outlet, sets the record straight on your terms. Tomorrow afternoon, Harry said. After Gringotts. I'll arrange it. Harry turned to Neville, who had been sitting quietly through this, eating a biscuit he'd found somewhere and listening with the attention of someone who has decided this situation is educational. You don't have to stay for all of this, Harry said. The library's still open. Neville looked slightly caught out. I'm fine here, he said. It's interesting. It really isn't, Ward said. It is to me, Neville said, mildly but with a firmness that made Ward look at him more carefully. Harry hid a smile in his tea. Ragnarok, the following morning, took Harry down to Vault 713 personally. That alone told Harry something. Ragnarok did not make personal visits to vaults. He was High Chief. He presided. He received reports. The fact that he was standing beside Harry in the Gringotts mine cart, riding down into the deep vaults with his ancient face composed and his hands folded, meant that whatever was in Vault 713 required the highest level of institutional care that Gringotts could bring to bear. The vault was unremarkable from the outside. Rough stone, heavy door, the kind of security wards that made Harry's ring pulse once as he walked past them. The door opened at his touch, not because it was his vault, but because Ragnarok had done something with a key while Harry wasn't looking, and when he looked at Ragnarok, the goblin said simply, Dumbledore surrendered access voluntarily this morning. Through his barrister. He asked that you be given it. He said something in his letter, Harry said. About this vault. About things that needed management. Yes, Ragnarok said. We have known about the contents for some time. We have been cautious about them. There are items in this vault that belong to your inheritance. There are also items that Dumbledore placed here for purposes of his own. What kind of purposes? Ragnarok looked at him. Come inside. The vault was not large, but it was dense. Shelves along 3 walls, each shelf holding objects wrapped in cloth or placed in cases, labeled in Dumbledore's cramped handwriting. In the center of the room, on a stone pedestal, something that Harry recognized before he could explain why, a round, smooth stone, unremarkable to look at, except that it felt like looking at something that was looking back. The Philosopher's Stone, Ragnarok said. Nicholas Flamel's. Dumbledore moved it here from its previous location, Hogwarts, specifically the Forbidden Corridor on the 3rd floor, 6 months ago. He believed it was being targeted. A pause. He was correct. The entity he was concerned about has been making attempts. Several times, in the past year, something has tried to access Hogwarts. Voldemort, Harry said. A remnant of him, Ragnarok said carefully. Not fully corporeal. We believe he is trying to restore himself. The stone would allow him to do so, through the elixir of life. Harry looked at the stone on its pedestal. It's safer here than at Hogwarts. Considerably. Gringotts wards are older than Hogwarts and substantially more resistant to possession and spirit magic. We have been aware of the attempted incursions at Hogwarts and have been confident that those methods would not work here. Ragnarok moved to the shelf on the left wall. However, the stone is not why you needed to come here. He gestured to the shelves. Harry looked. What was on those shelves, wrapped, encased and labeled, was immense. Not in size. In significance. Objects he didn't yet have names for, items whose labels, even partially understood, implied histories that stretched back centuries. A mirror, tall and ornate, the label reading simply, Erased, dangerous, do not touch. A locket, black metal, the label, Slytherin locket, Horcrux. Object neutralized 1994 by R. Weasley, Dumbledore's note, this date is a deliberate misdirection for security purposes. A ring with a cracked black stone, Resurrection Stone, Gaunt Peveril, recovered 1996, Horcrux neutralized. Harry stopped at the locket label. Read the note again. He's been collecting them, Harry said. The Horcruxes. Voldemort's Horcruxes. For 20 years, Ragnarok said. He has found 3. He believed there were more. He was building a strategy. Alone. Without telling anyone, without assistance, without a succession plan in the event of his incapacitation. The goblin's voice was dry as dust. As has apparently been his habit. Harry looked at the resurrection stone in its case. At the Peveril crest on its surface, the same crest on the ring on his finger, one of 7. The Deathly Hallows, he said. The books he'd bought in Flourish and Blots were already partially read, the one on Peveril history having jumped the queue in his internal ranking. The stone is 1. The Elder Wand is at Hogwarts, Ragnarok said. Or was. Its precise location is contested. The wand passes by conquest. Its last known legitimate holder was Gregorovitch, from whom it was taken by Grindelwald. A pause. Who surrendered it to Dumbledore in 1945? Harry stared at the goblin. Dumbledore had the Elder Wand. Yes. And he never, no. Because he didn't want the power. Because, Ragnarok said, with a precision that suggested this was an important distinction, he believed that keeping the wand hidden from everyone was the only safe option, and that believing was, characteristically, a decision he made for everyone without consulting anyone. Harry turned that over. Where is it now? With him. Under Ministry seal, as part of his personal effects. Ragnarok met Harry's eyes. It will need to be addressed. The wand responds to the strongest conqueror. With Dumbledore in custody, its allegiance is unsettled. One thing at a time, Harry said. He looked back at the shelves. The Horcruxes he hasn't found yet. Do we know what they are? He left notes, Ragnarok said, and produced a small leather journal from his robes. His private research. He surrendered it voluntarily, along with the vault access. He held the journal out. Harry took it. He didn't open it yet. He stood in the vault with the Philosopher's Stone warm on its pedestal behind him and the Resurrection Stone in its case in front of him and the weight of Dumbledore's 20 years of lonely strategy in his hands, and he thought about the letter in his pocket. I was wrong to believe that my judgment superseded your rights. I'm going to need help with this, Harry said. Not just legal help. Someone who knows about this kind of magic. The Horcruxes, the Hallows, all of it. Yes, Ragnarok said. You will. Do you have suggestions? Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. There is a professor at Hogwarts, he said. Filius Flitwick. He is a charms master and a dueling champion and he has, over many years, quietly assisted Dumbledore in certain research. He was never told the full picture. He knows enough to be useful and he is honest enough to be trustworthy. A pause. He also has no particular reason to be loyal to Dumbledore's method of doing things, having been on the receiving end of being kept uninformed for 30 years. "I'll write to him," Harry said. He put the journal in his breast pocket, next to the photograph and the letter. The pocket was getting crowded. He thought, vaguely, that he was going to need a better organizational system. "Ragnarok," he said, as they turned to leave the vault. "Harry. The Philosopher's Stone. Flamel is still alive. He and his wife Perenelle are both alive, yes. They are aware of the current situation. They have been in contact with us." Ragnarok glanced back at the stone. "They have asked that the stone be returned to them at the earliest opportunity. They also asked," a pause that contained something Harry thought might be amusement, in its goblin form, "that we convey their regards to you personally." "Why personally?" "Because Nicholas Flamel is 665 years old," Ragnarok said, "and in 665 years, he says he has never seen anyone throw a wizarding world into complete administrative chaos before their first day at school." Harry almost laughed. He managed to keep it to a smile, but it was a near thing. "Tell him I'm working on it," he said. The interview with Harold Finch happened at 4 o'clock in the Edinburgh parlour, over tea that Neville made because he had appointed himself the house's tea authority and nobody had objected. Finch was a small, bespectacled man in his 60s who had the quality of specific stillness that belonged to people who had spent decades listening more than talking. He had submitted 15 questions in advance. Harry had gone through them with Ward, answered 12 as written, modified 2, and declined 1 on the grounds that it touched on matters sub judice in Dumbledore's pending trial. The interview lasted 2 hours. Finch asked his questions. Harry answered them. Not performing, not crafting an image, just answering, clearly, directly, sometimes briefly and sometimes at length depending on what the question needed. At the end, Finch set down his quill. He looked at Harry for a moment. "One off-record question," he said. "If you're willing." Harry nodded. "You're 11 years old, you've just inherited 6 houses and more money than most governments have in reserve, the most powerful wizard in Britain has just been arrested substantially due to your actions, and you're about to start school for the first time." Finch paused. "How are you, actually?" Harry looked at him. It was a genuine question. He could tell the difference. "I'm angry," he said. "Not all the time. But it's there. Underneath everything." He thought about how to say the next part. "It's useful, though. Anger is useful if you know what to do with it. I'm working out what to do with it." "And the fear?" "I'm not afraid," Harry said simply. "There's nothing left to be afraid of. Everything I was supposed to be afraid of, being nobody, having nothing, being invisible, that's over. They took my family's future for 17 years. They can't take anything else that matters." He picked up his tea. "What's left to be afraid of?" Finch looked at him for a long moment. "Nothing, I suppose," he said, quietly. "Nothing at all." That evening, with Neville reading his way through the botanical section of the library upstairs, Harry sat alone at the kitchen table with Dumbledore's journal open in front of him. It was not what he'd expected. Not the self-justifications or elaborate philosophical reasoning of a man trying to excuse himself to posterity. It was a research journal, precise, methodical, often dry, the record of a very brilliant mind working through a very terrible problem. Notes on the nature of Horcruxes. Cross-references to ancient dark magic sources. Careful, reluctant conclusions drawn from evidence that pointed one way no matter how many times he checked it. Halfway through, Harry found a page where Dumbledore's handwriting changed. Just slightly, tighter, less elegant. Like someone writing something they didn't want to write. The 7th Horcrux. I have resisted this conclusion for 2 years. The evidence is overwhelming and I am running out of reasons to disbelieve it. On the night of October 31, 1981, when Voldemort's killing curse rebounded from Lily's sacrifice protection, the excess soul fragment, destabilized, formless, lethal in its instability, had to go somewhere. The only living thing in the room was Harry. I believe the 7th Horcrux is Harry Potter himself. I believe this, and I have been managing the implications of this belief for 9 years without telling him, without telling his godfather, without telling anyone, because the implication, if I am right, is that Voldemort cannot be permanently defeated without Harry's death. I have been wrong about many things. I pray I am wrong about this. Harry set the journal down very carefully on the table. He sat for a moment. Just sat. Then he picked it up again and kept reading, because the next line was, counter-evidence, the protection Lily placed is unlike anything recorded. It is possible, I am exploring this possibility, that the soul fragment could be extracted without Harry's death, if the soul fragment itself could be destroyed independently. I have 3 theories. None are proven. Harry read all 3 theories. Then he put the journal down, got up, went to the library, and pulled the heaviest book on ancient magic he could find. Brought it back to the kitchen table. Sat down. Opened both. Started working. Neville appeared in the doorway an hour later. Looked at the books, the journal, the notes Harry had started making in his own hand. Looked at Harry's face. Are you okay? He asked. I'm fine, Harry said. I just found something that needs solving. He looked up. Do you want to help? I can explain it. Neville came and sat across from him without another word, pulling one of the books toward himself. What are we looking for? Ancient soul magic, Harry said. Specifically anything about the separation of a foreign soul fragment from a living host without harming the host. Neville looked at the book. Looked at Harry. Is this about you? Yeah. Neville opened the book. Right then, he said. Where do we start? Outside, Edinburgh went dark again, and in the kitchen of the Potter house 2 11-year-olds worked through the night by wandlight, and the problem in front of them was immense and complicated and dangerous, and neither of them looked away from it. Chapter 4, The Wizengamot Fractures. The trial of Albus Dumbledore was scheduled for the 14th of August, which gave the wizarding world exactly 2 weeks to compose itself after the arrest and failed completely at doing so. The Prophet ran 17 front-page stories in 14 days. Which weekly ran 12, most of which were less about the legal proceedings and more about Harry Potter specifically, what he was wearing, where he was living, whether he had a romantic interest, a line of inquiry that Harry found both baffling and irritating given that he was 11 years old and had considerably more pressing things to think about. The International Wizarding Review published Finch's interview on day 4, and the response to it, measured, factual, a child speaking plainly about extraordinary circumstances with zero self-pity and zero performance, was so disproportionately positive compared to everything else being written that the Prophet immediately pivoted to running excerpts from it, which Ward found professionally satisfying in a way she was too dignified to express openly. The wizarding world fractured along lines that had always existed but had previously been held together by the gravitational mass of Dumbledore's reputation. On one side, those who believed the evidence, who were furious, who felt the specific betrayal of discovering that the man they trusted with their world had been playing God with it. On the other, those who couldn't or wouldn't accept it, who insisted the documentation was fabricated, the goblins were pursuing some agenda, the International Confederation was overstepping, Harry Potter was being used as a pawn by forces they named variously as foreign governments, dark wizards, or a general conspiratorial they that was doing exactly what the Dumbledore loyalists accused everyone else of doing, which was engineering events for their own benefit. Harry watched all of this with the attention of someone studying a map of terrain he's about to cross. He also, in the 14 days before the trial, did the following things. He wrote to Professor Flitwick and received a response within 24 hours that was 5 pages long, meticulously reasoned, and ended with "I will come to Edinburgh at your convenience and I am extremely relieved that someone is finally asking the right questions." He worked through Dumbledore's journal with Neville every night, the two of them building a research file that was now 40 pages of notes and cross-references. He visited Godric's Hollow twice more, alone, and did things there that he didn't explain to anyone. He attended, by flu, a preliminary Wizengamot session at which his 7 seats were formally registered under his name for the first time, an administrative moment of such significance that 3 senior Wizengamot members walked out in protest and 4 others started crying, which were equally extreme responses in Harry's view but both comprehensible. He received a letter from Nicholas Flamel, handwritten, in French and English alternating, clearly from someone who'd been writing in multiple languages for so long the distinction had blurred, that was warm and witty and contained more useful information about soul magic per sentence than any of the books he'd found in the Edinburgh library. He gave Neville his first experience of casting spells without the suppression bracelet, in the back garden, and watched Neville's face when the first proper spell came out clean and strong and nothing like the stuttering half-magic he'd been managing his whole life. That last thing was, Harry thought, the best 14 days had to offer. Again, Harry said, from the other end of the garden. Neville pointed his wand, a new one, cherry wood and unicorn hair, bought at Ollivander's on a Tuesday morning when the shop was quiet, Ollivander having made 3 different noises of professional interest before settling on it, and said, Wingardium Leviosa, and the stone Harry had placed on the garden wall rose 6 feet in the air, held perfectly steady, and stayed there. That's it, Harry said. I know, Neville said. He was watching the floating stone with an expression Harry couldn't quite categorize, not pride, not surprise, something older and more settled than either. Like recognition. Like this is what I'm supposed to feel like. Your grandmother's coming tomorrow, Harry said. I know. Neville brought the stone down gently, caught it. She wants me home before the trial. Do you want to go? Neville turned the stone over in his hand. I want to come to the trial, he said. It wasn't quite an answer but it was honest. Can I? I wasn't planning on going myself, Harry said. Cross said, I know what Cross said. I also know you're going. Neville looked at him. You have 7 seats on the Wizengamot. You're the primary injured party. Every piece of documentation in that trial has your name at the top of it. A pause. You're going. Harry said nothing for a moment. Cross thinks it's strategically complicated. What do you think? Harry thought about it. I think Dumbledore deserves to look at who he stole from while he's being tried for it. Neville nodded. Then I'm coming. Professor Flitwick arrived on the 9th day. He was exactly as small as his reputation suggested, barely taller than Harry, which Harry found statistically interesting, and he came through the Edinburgh flu with a briefcase, a thermos of tea he brought from his own kitchen, and an expression of compressed, energized focus that reminded Harry of a coiled spring. He shook Harry's hand with both of his. Lord Potter, he said. I'm sorry, this is quite a moment. Your mother was one of my best students. Lily Evans. Her wand work was extraordinary. He paused. I'm told you've been doing research. Come and sit down, Harry said. I'll show you what we have. They spent 8 hours at the kitchen table. Flitwick went through the research notes Harry and Neville had produced with the focused efficiency of someone who has spent decades reviewing student work and could separate the significant from the noise at speed. He added his own notes in margins. He corrected 2 things, confirmed 6, and added 3 new directions Harry hadn't considered. At the end of the 8 hours, Flitwick sat back and looked at the research file, now substantially thicker, and said, the soul fragment theory is correct. Dumbledore was right about the diagnosis. He was wrong about the prognosis. He tapped one of his margin notes. The fragment is not integrated into your core magic. It's adjacent to it. Like an impurity in a crystal lattice. Real, present, detectable, but separable if you know the right force to apply. Can you do it? Harry asked. The separation. Flitwick looked at him carefully. I believe so. It would require specific conditions, a moment of extreme magical stress, properly directed, during which the fragment can be expelled. The theory is sound. The application is, not without risk. How much risk? Meaningful, Flitwick said. He didn't soften it. But the alternative, leaving the fragment in place, is also meaningful risk. Voldemort's remaining consciousness will be drawn to it. He will be able to sense your location, your emotions, potentially access your thoughts, the closer he gets to corporeal form. Then we plan the extraction, Harry said. Not now. After the trial. After Sirius's case is resolved. When we have time to do it right. Flitwick nodded. Agreed. He picked up his thermos. You know, I've been at Hogwarts for 40 years, and in 40 years Albus never told me any of this. Not the Horcruxes, not the Hallows, not what he suspected about you. He was quiet for a moment. He thought he was protecting people. I know, Harry said. You're not angry at me? For being part of the institution? You weren't part of it, Harry said. You were kept out of it. There's a difference. He looked at the small professor. I'd like you to be part of this, though. Going forward. If you're willing. Flitwick was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, but the way a face shifts when someone is offered something they hadn't known they wanted. Yes, he said. I am very willing. The morning of the trial, Harry was up before dawn. He dressed with more care than usual, not because he wanted to perform or impress, but because he had come to understand, in the 14 days since his birthday, that appearance communicated things before words did, and he wanted to communicate specific things to the Wizengamot today. His robes were the good ones Ward had helped him select, dark green, well cut, with the Potter crest on the left chest and the subtle interlocking rings of all 6 houses woven into the hem in thread that caught the light without shouting about it. The ring on his right index finger. His hair was doing what it always did, but he'd stopped fighting it. He looked in the mirror. Thought about the boy from the cupboard. Thought about the boy in the garden shed on his birthday with a letter in his lap. Yeah, he thought. Okay. Neville was already in the kitchen when Harry came down, similarly dressed. His grandmother had sent new robes by Owl the previous evening, long-bottom colors, and he was wearing them with the slightly uncertain posture of someone not yet used to taking up the space they're entitled to. Harry looked at him and he straightened. Ready? Harry asked. Ask me again in an hour, Neville said. You. Been ready, Harry said. Ward arrived at 7:30 with Cross and Sharma and a stack of documents in a leather case and the expression of someone who has already had 3 arguments this morning and won all of them. The Wizengamot will convene at 9, she said, setting the case on the table. We have gallery access confirmed. I want to be clear, she looked at Harry with the particular focused directness that was her version of a stern expression, you are there as an observer and a potential witness. You are not there to perform. You are not there to provoke. If you are called to testify, you testify. If you are not called, you observe. Understood? Understood, Harry said. Ward looked at him for a moment longer, as though checking the quality of that agreement. You're going to do something I haven't planned for, she said. Probably, Harry said. She sighed. Try to warn me first. The Wizengamot chamber was fuller than it had been for anything in a generation. Every seat in the gallery was taken. Every Wizengamot member was present, some Harry had already identified from Cross's briefings, some he was identifying now in real time from the crests on their robes. The chamber hummed with the particular energy of a place where something is about to happen that everyone knows is historic and nobody is entirely sure they're on the right side of. Harry and Neville took seats in the upper gallery with Ward and Cross. Below them, in the chamber's main floor, the acting chief warlock, Madame Marchbanks, who had taken the seat on an emergency temporary basis and wore it with the ease of someone who had been waiting for the institution to need her specific qualities for some time, called the session to order with a single tap of her staff. Dumbledore was brought in from a side door. He looked, Harry watched carefully, he looked the same. That was the disconcerting thing. The same magnificent robes, still purple though a lighter shade today, the half-moon spectacles, the silver beard, the bearing of someone who has never in his life walked into a room and doubted his right to be there. The binding charm on his wrists was subtle, barely visible, a slight shimmer in the air around his hands that would prevent him from casting. He sat in the defendant's chair, iron, in the center of the chamber, with chains that remained unfastened, this being treated as a non-violent case, and he looked up at the gallery. His eyes found Harry immediately. Harry met his gaze and held it. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Not with guilt, exactly. With something more complicated, the look of someone taking in a thing they had shaped, discovering that it had become something different from what they'd intended, and not being entirely certain whether to be relieved or sorrowful about that. Harry looked back without expression. Dumbledore looked away first. The prosecution was led by a ministry barrister named Aldous Brown, who was methodical and thorough and spent the first 2 hours walking the Wizengamot through the evidence in careful chronological order. Ragnarok testified via a prepared statement read by Sharprock. Goblins, by ancient custom, were not required to appear in the Wizengamot in person, a treaty right they enforced absolutely. Madame Delacroix testified in person, her Confederation credentials establishing the international dimension of the case. A forensic accountant from both Gringotts and the Ministry testified about the vault documentation. The evidence was overwhelming. Harry had known this. He watched it unfold anyway, watching not just the evidence but the room, the faces of the Wizengamot members, the subtle shift in the gallery's atmosphere as the documentation accumulated, the careful non-reaction of Dumbledore's defense barrister, who was clearly experienced enough to understand that the first session was not the time to fight. At 11 o'clock, Madame Marchbanks called a brief recess. The gallery erupted into noise. Harry stayed in his seat. Neville stayed beside him. Ward leaned over. "They're going to call you this afternoon. Brown confirmed it this morning, he wants you as the final witness before closing arguments." "Good," Harry said. "I want to run through, I know what I'm going to say," Harry said. Ward looked at him. "I know you do. I want to run through it anyway." Harry conceded this with a nod. They spent the recess in a side room, Ward running through questions and Harry answering them, and every answer was as he described it, clear, direct, minimal performance, maximum fact. The one question Ward added at the end, the one she hadn't shown him in advance: when Dumbledore's barrister cross-examines you, and he will suggest that whatever harm was done with good intentions. That Dumbledore believed he was protecting you. How do you respond to that? Harry thought about it. I say, good intentions are not the same as good actions. The harm was real. The rights violated were real. 11 years in a house where I was a burden, not a family member, was real. Whatever he intended doesn't undo what happened. Ward looked at him. "Good," she said. "He did intend it as protection, though," Harry said. "I think that's true. I'm not going to lie about it." He looked at his hands. He was wrong. He was arrogant. He treated my life like a piece on a board. But I don't think he woke up every morning and decided to destroy my life. He woke up every morning and decided he knew best. He paused. That's almost worse. Ward was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "It is." They reconvened at 1 o'clock. The defense presented its case for 2 hours. Dumbledore's barrister, a hawk-nosed veteran named Caractacus Selwyn, argued with considerable skill that the actions taken were within the scope of the magical guardianship agreement, that the funds transferred had been used for Harry's care and protection, that the decisions made, including the placement at Privet Drive, including the management of the inherited vaults, were made in good faith under the authority legally vested in Dumbledore as the recognized leader of the wizarding world's response to Voldemort. It was a good argument. Harry watched the Wizengamot members watching it and could see the ones who wanted to believe it working to let themselves. Then Dumbledore's own testimony. Selwyn questioned him for 30 minutes, allowing him to explain himself in his own words, and Dumbledore was, Harry had to grant this, honest. He did not prevaricate. He confirmed the vault actions. He confirmed the Privet Drive placement. He confirmed the proxy accounts. He explained his reasoning with the clarity of someone who had spent months preparing to be honest about things he'd kept private for years, and his reasoning was internally coherent, even if its foundations were rotten. Brown's cross-examination lasted 45 minutes. At the end of it, Dumbledore had confirmed 5 additional counts that Selwyn hadn't quite managed to keep out of the record, and Brown had established, with clinical precision, that the good faith argument collapsed the moment you applied it to facts rather than intentions. Then, the prosecution calls Harry James Potter Peveril Black. Harry stood. Neville put a hand briefly on his arm, not stopping him, just there, and then Harry was walking down from the gallery to the chamber floor, and the whole room went quiet with the quality of a held breath. He sat in the witness chair. He was aware of being small in it, the chair was sized for an adult, and his feet didn't quite reach the floor. He was also aware that this detail, the small boy in the too big chair, was doing more work in that chamber than anything he could say, and he let it, because it was true and truth was the whole point. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore was looking at him. Brown was gentle with him, the way prosecution barristers are gentle with sympathetic witnesses, not patronizing, not performing sympathy, but careful. He walked Harry through the childhood at Privet Drive, the cupboard, the handed-down clothes, the systematic dismissal. He walked through the discovery at Gringotts. He asked Harry to confirm the contents of the 31 vaults and Harry confirmed them, line by line, from memory, because he had read that documentation 17 times in 14 days and it was not something he was likely to forget. When Brown sat down, Selwyn rose. Lord Potter, Selwyn said, using the title with a slight emphasis that was meant to be gentle skepticism. You were 11 years old 6 weeks ago. Still am, Harry said. A ripple through the chamber. Not laughter exactly. Recognition. You've had a great deal of information handed to you in a very short time, Selwyn said. About your family, about Professor Dumbledore's decisions, about very complicated financial and legal matters. Do you think it's possible that some of that information has been shaped by parties who had their own interests in the outcome? All information is shaped by someone, Harry said. That's why I read the primary documents myself. 12 times. He paused. 17 times, for the vault records. A child, Selwyn said, reading complex goblin financial documentation. A child who was told he had nothing, Harry said, and turned out to have 31 vaults and 6 house lordships and 12 properties and a considerable portion of the wizarding world's political infrastructure, all of which was managed without his knowledge or consent for 11 years. He looked at Selwyn. I had some motivation to understand the paperwork. Another ripple. Selwyn changed tack. Professor Dumbledore testified that his decisions were made to protect you. To protect the wizarding world. Do you believe he intended harm? No, Harry said. Selwyn paused, clearly having expected a different answer. No. I don't think he intended harm, Harry said. I think he intended control. I think he decided, without asking me or anyone connected to me, that he understood my life better than I could, that he could manage the risks better than I could, that his judgment about what was good for me and for the wizarding world was so reliable that it didn't need to be checked by anyone, including me. He held Selwyn's gaze. Good intentions don't make that right. He stole 11 years of a life from me. He stole my family's wealth. He put my godfather in prison without a trial. He had my magic. He glanced at Neville in the gallery, not mine, but someone connected to this case, someone whose vault was also touched by this, had their magic suppressed because it was convenient for his management of the Wizengamot. His voice was level throughout. Not angry-sounding. Just factual, the way facts are most devastating when you let them be themselves. Good intentions are not a defense. They are an explanation. There is a difference. Selwyn looked at him for a long moment. Then he sat down. Madame Marchbanks looked at Harry over her spectacles. Lord Potter, she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite warmth. Marchbanks was not a warm woman, but was something adjacent to respect. Thank you for your testimony. You may return to the gallery. Harry stood. Walked back up. As he passed the defendant's chair, he looked at Dumbledore one more time. Dumbledore was looking at his hands. The binding charm shimmered faintly. Harry kept walking. The verdict took 2 hours of closed deliberation. He sat in the corridor outside with Neville and Ward and Cross, and Neville conjured a small flame in his palm, new skill, discovered 3 days ago. Apparently the block had been suppressing a natural talent for elemental charm work, and passed it back and forth between his hands while they waited. Harry read from Dumbledore's journal, because the waiting was going to happen whether he did something productive with it or not, and there were still theoretical passages on Horcrux extraction he hadn't fully mapped against Flitwick's notes. A ministry official appeared in the doorway at 4:30. "They're ready," she said. "Guilty on 27 of 31 counts." The 4 acquittals were on charges that Brown had included somewhat speculatively, 2 counts of bribery that rested on circumstantial evidence the Wizengamot found insufficient, 1 charge of conspiracy that overlapped with a parallel Confederation case and was deferred to that jurisdiction, and 1 count related to the suppression of Neville's magic that had been argued as within the scope of the Guardianship Authority's discretionary powers, a decision that Augusta Longbottom, sitting 3 rows behind Harry, received with a jaw set hard enough to carve stone. 27 counts. Guilty. The sentencing discussion would be next session. The Wizengamot spent 45 minutes on procedure and then Marchbanks called the session closed. The gallery was not silent. It was not celebratory either. It was the particular sound of a large group of people processing something that was simultaneously satisfying and devastating, the sound of getting the answer you were owed and discovering that having the answer doesn't make the question hurt less. Harry sat in his chair while the chamber emptied around him. Cornelius Fudge materialized at the gallery railing beside him with the sudden, slightly desperate energy of a man who has made a political calculation in the last 4 minutes and is acting on it before he can reconsider. He was round-faced, green bowler hatted, sweating slightly. "Lord Potter," he said. "Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic. I think it's very important that the Ministry and yourself have a chance to, minister," Harry said pleasantly. Fudge blinked. "Yes. I appreciate you introducing yourself. My legal team will be in touch with the Ministry regarding the restoration of my Wizengamot seats and several related administrative matters." He stood, gathering his things. "I don't think we need to have a personal meeting about any of it." Fudge's mouth opened. "Lord Potter, the Ministry's handling of the original vault situation, the handling of Sirius Black's case, and the 17 years during which the Department of Magical Law Enforcement was apparently unaware of an arrangement that violated the Magical Inheritance Treaty of 1689, are all matters my legal team has noted for the record," Harry said, without heat and without particular emphasis. "I'm not suggesting any personal wrongdoing on your part, Minister. I'm suggesting that my affairs are best handled through proper legal channels rather than personal meetings, for everyone's protection, including yours." Fudge stared at him. "Have a good evening," Harry said. He and Neville walked out. In the corridor, out of Fudge's sight, Neville looked at him. "Was that entirely necessary?" "Yes," Harry said. "Fair enough," Neville said. The thing Harry hadn't anticipated, the thing that arrived not through legal channels or political maneuvering but through a different kind of attention entirely, came that evening. He was back in Edinburgh, at the kitchen table with the journal and his notes, when Athena arrived with 2 letters at once, which she managed with the competent disdain of someone performing a task beneath their abilities. The first letter was from France. The crest was one he didn't recognize, a wave of silver over dark water, the kind of crest that had been old when most of the British noble houses were being established. The letter was in impeccable English with the slight formality of someone who thinks in another language. "Lord Potter, my name is Apollon Delacour. My husband is Claude Delacour, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of the French Magical Government. We have followed the events of the past 2 weeks with great interest. We believe there are matters of mutual benefit that could be discussed between your houses and the French magical government. We also have a daughter, Fleur, aged 13, who has expressed considerable interest in meeting you, which I mention not for any political purpose but because she has mentioned it 4 times this week and I have learned that Fleur's 4 times mentioned interests tend to occur regardless of whether I facilitate them. Please consider this an open invitation. The matter of the Triwizard Tournament, which my government is co-organizing for 1994, may be of relevance to certain shared concerns. Apollon Delacour. Harry set this aside for Sharma and looked at the second letter. This one was different. No crest. No official letterhead. Written on plain parchment in a hand he didn't recognize, quick and slightly messy, like someone who wrote fast and didn't often write letters at all. Potter, I heard what you said in the Wizengamot today. I was in the gallery. I think you noticed me, based on the way you looked at the left section of seats after your testimony. If you didn't, disregard that. My name is Marcus Flint. I am 17 years old and a Slytherin at Hogwarts. My family has affiliations. The kind of affiliations that meant my father voted consistently in the Wizengamot for whatever Dumbledore's opposition wanted, which in the past decade has mainly been whatever Lucius Malfoy wanted. I am not writing to apologize for my family. I am writing because I heard what you said about control and intentions and the difference between an explanation and a defense, and I am aware that that distinction applies to more than one institution in the wizarding world. I don't know what you're planning at Hogwarts. I don't know what you're planning generally. But I know which way the wind is blowing, and I know that the Slytherin house as a political bloc has spent 20 years being used as a tool by people who didn't give a damn about us, just like everyone else was being used by people who didn't give a damn about them. If you're interested in talking to someone who knows the inside of that, I'm available. Flint. Harry read this letter twice. Then he put it with the Delacour letter, not the discard pile but the active pile, the one that needed thinking about. He thought about the Slytherin vault. His vault, technically. The Founder's vault, with its centuries of accumulated significance, belonging by blood right to the boy who'd grown up in a cupboard and was now finding that the world was considerably more complicated and considerably more interesting than that cupboard had suggested. He picked up his quill. Flint, I noticed you. Third row from the left, grey robes, the expression of someone who had decided something and wasn't sure it was right. I'm interested in talking. Come to Edinburgh on Saturday. I'll have tea. Potter. He sent it with Athena, who left with the air of someone who has decided their schedule for the evening and will not be taking questions. Then he turned back to the journal, found his place, and kept working. Somewhere in the depths of the city, a clock struck 9. The Edinburgh house held its quiet around him, and the fire burned low, and on the desk beside his notes sat the ring with its 7 crests, warm in the firelight, patient as everything it had been waiting for. 3 days later, Voldemort made his move. It came not as an attack, not directly, not yet, because whatever remained of Voldemort was still too insubstantial for direct confrontation. It came as an attempt at the Gringotts wards, which Harry learned about from Ragnarok via an emergency flu at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, 3 days after the trial verdict. Something tested our outer perimeter, Ragnarok said. His ancient face in the green flame was composed, but there was an alertness in it that hadn't been there in their earlier meetings. Not a body. A consciousness. Spirit walking, using a host. We believe a possessed human was brought to the entrance of Diagon Alley and used as a conduit. The host is currently in St. Mungo's. They'll recover. It was looking for the stone, Harry said. And for you, Ragnarok said. The soul fragment responds to his consciousness. He can sense its direction. Harry thought about Flitwick's assessment. The fragment, adjacent to his core. Detectable. A beacon. How long before he's strong enough to come himself? Months, at current rate. Perhaps less if he finds a suitable host. Ragnarok paused. We have accelerated the wards. And the stone? Still here. Still safe. Another pause. However, the stone's presence in proximity to the fragment in you creates a resonance. He is drawn to both simultaneously. Keeping them in the same city may not be advisable indefinitely. We'll return it to Flamel, Harry said. As soon as we can arrange the transfer safely. Agreed. Ragnarok looked at him through the fire. Harry. The extraction Flitwick has been researching. How close is the theory? Close, Harry said. We need one more piece. A specific application method. Flitwick says there's a ritual in a Peveril text he's tracking down. He thinks he can have it in 2 weeks. Make it one, Ragnock said. Harry met the old goblin's eyes through the fire. 1 week, he said. I'll tell Flitwick. Good. Ragnock's face receded slightly. One more thing. Your Godfather's review. The Wizengamot emergency panel meets next Monday. Harry had not forgotten Sirius Black for a single day since Cross had told him the story. He'd thought about it every morning when he woke up in the Edinburgh house, in the room that was his, in the house that was his, with the freedom that was his, thought about it in the specific way you think about an injustice that has a face, that has a cell, that has 12 years of Azkaban attached to it. I'll be there, Harry said. I know, Ragnock said, and the flue went dark. Harry stood for a moment in the parlor in the dark, the coals of the fire glowing orange below the cold grate, the city quiet outside. Then he went upstairs, woke Neville, who had stayed through the trial and through the Flint visit and showed no signs of leaving, which Harry had stopped questioning and started appreciating, and said, Something's happening with Voldemort. I need to tell you about it, because it affects our research. Neville sat up, fully awake with the immediacy of someone who had been waiting for the next development. Okay, he said. Tell me. Harry told him. And then they were up for the rest of the night again, 2 boys in a house that was theirs, with a problem that was enormous and a solution that was close, and neither of them afraid of the space between where they were and where they needed to get to. Chapter 5, Azkaban's Ghost. The emergency Wizengamot review panel for Sirius Orion Black convened on a Monday morning in a smaller chamber than the one used for Dumbledore's trial, but what it lacked in architectural grandeur it compensated for in raw tension. 7 panel members instead of the full Wizengamot, Marchbanks presiding again, for others Harry had identified from Cross's files as largely impartial, one who was almost certainly going to be difficult, and one who had been visibly emotional during the Dumbledore verdict and might swing either way depending on how the morning went. Harry arrived early. Not because Cross had told him to, Cross had actually told him to arrive at the regular time, with everyone else, to avoid the appearance of staging, but because Harry had a different idea about what this morning needed and had informed Cross of it at 7 a.m., giving his barrister approximately 90 seconds to adjust. You could have told me last night, Cross said, standing in the corridor outside the chamber with the patient expression of a man who had been surprised by his client before and had updated his preparation strategy accordingly. I worked it out this morning, Harry said. You worked out the centerpiece of today's legal proceedings while eating breakfast. I work well in the mornings. Cross looked at him. The pensive evidence. You're certain about the chain of custody? Completely. Ragnock had it verified by 3 independent cursebreakers and a memory specialist from the Confederation. Madame Delacroix countersigned the authentication. The chain is unimpeachable. And the memory itself, you watched it? Yes. And? Harry looked at the chamber door. Peter Pettigrew is alive, he said. And the memory proves it. Cross was quiet for a moment. He had the look of a man recalculating several things simultaneously. That changes the scope of today considerably. Yes, Harry said. It does. The memory had come from an unexpected place. 6 days ago, sorting through the contents of a secondary storage vault connected to the Peveril inheritance, a small vault, mostly documents and minor artifacts, the kind of thing that got lumped into an estate and forgotten about, a Gringotts cursebreaker had found a crystal vial. Standard memory storage, the kind witches and wizards used before pensieves became common, sealed with a preservation charm that dated it to approximately 1981. The label on the vial, in handwriting that the Gringotts authentication team had confirmed matched Albus Dumbledore's writing from correspondence dated to the early 1980s, read simply, PJP, Halloween 1981, Godric's Hollow Environs, do not destroy. Ragnock had contacted Harry immediately. Harry had come to Gringotts, accompanied by Ward and a Confederation-certified memory specialist named Beaumont, and they had viewed the memory together in a Gringotts pensive under full chain of custody protocols. The memory was Dumbledore's own. From his perspective, moving through the chaos of the night after the Potters' deaths, following an instinct or a tip, the memory didn't clarify which, to a lane behind a pub in the village nearest to Godric's Hollow. And there, in the alley behind the pub, caught on a memory that Dumbledore had clearly stored and then apparently decided not to use for reasons he'd taken with him into Ministry custody, Peter Pettigrew. Alive. Bleeding from a self-inflicted wound on his right hand where he'd cut off his own finger. Transforming. A rat, a large grey rat, slipping through a gap in the pub wall and vanishing into the dark. Dumbledore's memory stood in that alley for a long moment after the rat disappeared, and then turned and walked away, and the memory ended. He had known. He had known that night that Pettigrew was alive. That Sirius Black had been framed. And he had stored the memory and said nothing, and Sirius Black had gone to Azkaban without a trial, and 12 years had passed. Harry had watched the memory twice. The second time, he had felt something that was colder and cleaner than anger, the particular feeling of a piece of information falling into place with a click that you feel in your chest. He had said, to the room, "We use this." Nobody had argued. The panel convened. Marchbanks read the case summary, the original 1981 conviction record, notable for its brevity and its complete absence of any trial transcript, because there had been no trial. She read it in the flat, precise tone of someone who has been doing this for 50 years and has learned that the most damning things are most damning when you let them speak for themselves. The panel member Harry had identified as likely difficult, a heavy-set man named Parkinson, whose robes bore the crest of a family with historical Death Eater connections, whatever that meant in terms of his current allegiances, was already watching Harry from across the chamber with the expression of someone building a counterargument. Brown, acting again for the prosecution, though prosecution felt like the wrong word when the person being prosecuted was the Ministry's own handling of the case, presented the foundational argument in 20 minutes. Illegal detention. Absence of trial. Violation of every applicable procedural protection under wizarding law. He was efficient about it, because the case was genuinely this simple at its most basic level. Then he called Harry. Harry took the witness stand, the same too-big chair as the previous session, his feet not quite reaching the floor, and Brown walked him through the preliminary, his relationship to Sirius Black, his legal standing as heir, the discovery of the vault connection. Then, Lord Potter, you have brought evidence to this panel today that was not available to us prior to this morning. Yes, Harry said. Can you describe the nature of that evidence? A memory, Harry said. In a crystal vial. Found in a Gringotts vault belonging to the Peveril estate, which transferred to me as part of my inheritance. The memory has been authenticated by 3 independent Gringotts cursebreakers and a Confederation-certified specialist named Beaumont. Madame Delacroix of the International Confederation countersigned the authentication documentation. He paused. The memory belongs to Albus Dumbledore. It is dated to the night of October 31st, 1981. The chamber was very quiet. It shows, Harry said, Peter Pettigrew. Alive. In a lane behind a pub near Godric's Hollow. Cutting off his own finger and transforming into a rat. Parkinson made a sound. Marchbanks silenced him with a look that had clearly been refined over decades into a precise instrument. The memory was stored and labeled by Dumbledore, Harry continued. The label reads, PJP, Halloween 1981, Godric's Hollow Environs, do not destroy. PJP being, we believe, an abbreviation of Peter James Pettigrew. And the memory is available for this panel to view? Brown asked. A pensieve is set up in the adjacent room, Harry said. With Madame Delacroix present throughout and the chain of custody documentation available for any member of the panel who wishes to verify it before viewing. Marchbanks turned to her panel. We will take a 30-minute recess for the panel to view the evidence. She looked at Parkinson specifically. All panel members will view the evidence. Parkinson looked like he wanted to argue. He looked at Marchbanks. He did not argue. Harry sat in the corridor during the recess and ate the sandwich Neville had pressed into his hand that morning with the air of someone who had learned that Harry forgot to eat when he was focused and had decided to compensate for this institutionally. It was ham and mustard. He ate it without tasting it and watched the corridor. A door at the far end opened, and two Aurors entered, and between them, walking slowly, the walk of someone whose body has been asked to perform basic functions on insufficient resources for a very long time, was Sirius Black. Harry had seen photographs. The wanted posters from the newspapers, technically, which were not photographs at their most generous, grainy, dramatic, the face contorted in the way faces contort when they're torn from a happy photograph and repurposed for something else. He'd seen one actual photograph of Sirius, found in the Peveril vault among a collection of early Order of the Phoenix pictures, a young man in his early 20s, dark-haired and handsome, with the particular laughing energy of someone who found the universe a source of ongoing entertainment. The man walking between the Aurors was 43 years old and looked older. Thin in the way people are thin when they've been thin for too long, the kind of thin that shows in the hands and the neck in the particular way bones sit close under skin. His hair was long and tangled and still dark, which was startling. Harry had expected grey, expected the visible marking of 12 years. His eyes were grey, still sharp, sharper than the rest of him, looking around the corridor with the quick assessment of someone whose survival instincts were fully operational regardless of the state of everything else. Those eyes found Harry. Sirius Black stopped walking. The Aurors, trained for exactly this kind of moment, stopped with him without making anything of it. Harry stood up from his bench. They looked at each other across the corridor. Harry didn't know what Sirius saw, a boy he'd never met, who looked like James but had Lily's eyes, according to every person who'd ever said anything about his parents, which was a piece of information Harry had been given so many times it had stopped meaning anything specific. He didn't know what his face was doing. What he saw was a man who had been put in a box and left there for 12 years by the same forces that had put Harry in a smaller box of a different kind. He saw the 12 years in the thin hands and the too careful walk. He saw past them to something else, the sharpness in those grey eyes, still present, still looking. "Harry," Sirius said. His voice was rough but steady. "Sirius," Harry said. They stood for a moment. The corridor was very quiet. Then Sirius Black did something that Harry hadn't anticipated and didn't quite know what to do with. He laughed. Not a manic laugh, not the laugh of someone who had been in Azkaban long enough to lose the thread of what was funny. A real laugh, tired and genuine, the sound of someone who has just experienced a feeling too large for any other expression. "You look like James," Sirius said. "And nothing like him at all." "People keep mentioning that," Harry said. "You've arrested Dumbledore," Sirius said. "Before your first day at school." "The goblins did most of the work," Harry said. "Don't be modest. Ragnarok doesn't do anything without a reason and you're the reason." Sirius looked at him with an expression that was attempting to hold several things at once, grief, recognition, something tentative and careful that was not yet hope but was the precursor to it. "The evidence today. The memory. Yes. I heard Brown mention it through the door." His jaw tightened briefly, briefly enough that Harry almost missed it. "Dumbledore had it the whole time." "Yes," Harry said. Sirius was quiet for a moment. The corridor existed around them, the two Aurors patient and professionally absent. "We don't know each other," Sirius said. "I want to say that straight out. We don't know each other and I'm in no state to be anyone's anything right now." He said it carefully, like someone who has been given a gift and is terrified of breaking it by grabbing too fast. "But I'd like to." "So would I," Harry said. One of the Aurors shifted. "Mr. Black, we need," "Yeah," Sirius said. He looked at Harry once more. "After," he said. "After," Harry agreed. The panel reconvened. The viewing of the memory had done what it was always going to do, the evidence was the evidence, and the evidence was clear, and there was no interpretation of Peter Pettigrew transforming in that alley that was compatible with Sirius Black having committed the crime he'd been imprisoned for. Parkinson tried anyway. The memory's provenance, he started, has been established by 3 independent experts and countersigned by an International Confederation observer, Marchbank said. Mr. Parkinson, if you have a substantive objection to the authentication methodology, you may raise it. If your objection is to the inconvenient nature of the evidence itself, I recommend you sit down. Parkinson sat down. The panel deliberated for 40 minutes. The vote was 6-1. Parkinson being the one, which told Harry something about the Parkinson family's reading of their own best interests that he filed away for later. Madame Marchbanks looked up from the panel's written decision. Sirius Orion Black, she said, this panel finds that your 1981 detention was unlawful, in violation of Section 14 of the Wizarding Rights Act of 1897, specifically, the right to trial before incarceration, and in violation of the International Magical Covenant on the Treatment of Accused Persons, to which Britain has been a signatory since 1920. She set the paper down. You are exonerated of all charges connected to the events of November 1, 1981. Your immediate release is ordered. Compensation proceedings will be initiated by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement under Director Bones within 30 days. She paused. The panel also recommends that the matter of Peter Pettigrew's whereabouts be referred to the Aura Department as a priority investigation, and that the matter of Albus Dumbledore's knowledge of Mr. Black's innocence be referred to the ongoing criminal proceedings as an additional count. She looked at Parkinson. Unanimously. Parkinson's expression suggested this was not a unanimity he'd agreed to. His expression was not consulted. The logistics of releasing someone from Azkaban were apparently substantial, which meant that the actual release, the formal signing, the removal of the tracking charms that had been placed on Sirius in custody, the provision of emergency healer access, the paperwork that was apparently the same mountain of paperwork regardless of what it related to, took most of the afternoon. Harry handled paperwork. Ward was there, efficient and thorough, and Sharma had appeared at some point to deal with the compensation claim documentation, and Cross was managing the referral to Dumbledore's proceedings. Harry signed things and answered questions and watched the afternoon move through the windows of the Ministry anteroom where they'd been placed while Sirius's release was processed. Neville arrived at 2 o'clock, because he'd gone home to his grandmother's after the morning session and apparently Augusta had told him to go back, which Harry found he was increasingly grateful for Augusta Longbottom's practical understanding of when her grandson was needed somewhere. How did it go? Neville asked, sitting beside Harry. 6-1, Harry said. Neville exhaled. Good. He paused. How is he? Thin, Harry said. Sharp. He thought about the laugh in the corridor, the careful hope behind the careful words. He's going to be fine. Eventually. And you? Harry looked at him. I'm fine now. Neville didn't push it. He pulled out the botanical first edition he'd been carrying in his bag for the past 2 weeks and read, and Harry went back to the document Cross had passed him, and they sat in companionable silence while the afternoon passed. At 4:30, the door opened and Sirius Black walked through it. He'd been given fresh robes, ministry issue, plain gray, not ideal but clean, and someone had provided a meal at some point because he moved with slightly more steadiness than he had that morning. His hair was still a disaster but it looked like a considered disaster rather than an unconsidered one, which suggested he'd done something to it. A healer had clearly been at his hands, the knuckles that had been swollen that morning were straight. He stopped in the doorway and looked at Harry and Neville. Neville stood up, because Neville had good instincts about these things, and extended his hand. Neville Longbottom, he said. Augusta's grandson. Sirius looked at him. Then, slowly, shook his hand. I knew your parents, he said. Before. He seemed to catch himself on something. Moved past it. Is she well? Augusta. Furious, Neville said. In a productive way. Something like a smile crossed Sirius's face. Good. She was always best furious. He looked at Harry. They say you have a house. Several, Harry said. The Edinburgh one is livable. Edinburgh. Yes. Scotland, Sirius said. He seemed to be orienting himself, the way people orient themselves when they've been somewhere that disorients on a fundamental level and are now being offered ordinary geography as a handhold. Right. And there's food there. There's food, Harry confirmed. Neville makes tea. Sirius looked at Neville. Do you? I've been told it's good, Neville said. Then, Sirius said, that sounds, he stopped. For just a moment, behind the steadiness and the sharp eyes and the careful control, something showed that was not any of those things. Something tired and old and enormous that had been held together for 12 years through sheer necessity and was now, in the anteroom of the ministry on a Monday afternoon, discovering that it could afford to be tired. That sounds very good, he finished. Harry stood. Let's go, then, he said. The Edinburgh house made room for him the way old houses make room, without fuss, without drama. The wards recognized the black blood in his lineage and settled around him the way they'd settled around Harry, a quiet acknowledgement. The spare room on the second floor, the one Harry had been keeping as a study overflow, rearranged itself slightly when Sirius walked in, the furniture shifting to accommodate a taller person, a window tilting open to let in the evening air. Sirius stood in the doorway and looked at the room. It knows me, he said. It knows the black line, Harry said. You're the head of it. Sirius turned and looked at him. You've been running the Black Estate. Gringotts has. On my behalf, pending your release. Harry paused. It's yours now. All of it. Ward has the transfer paperwork ready whenever you are. Harry, it was always yours, Harry said. I just held the seat until you could take it back. He met Sirius's eyes directly. I'm not doing anything out of charity. The Black family vault is yours by right and the house lordship is yours by right and I have enough houses without adding someone else's. Sirius was quiet for a long moment. Your father would have said exactly that, he said. That exact phrasing. Was that good or bad? It was very James. A pause. It was good. He looked around the room again. I'd like to sleep, he said, and there was something in it that was not quite asking permission but was aware of the strangeness of being somewhere that had a door he could close and a bed that was his and no dementors outside it. If that's, the room's yours, Harry said. Sleep. We'll eat when you wake up. He pulled the door closed as he left. Stood in the hallway for a moment listening to nothing, which was the sound of someone who had earned silence finally getting it. Then he went downstairs, where Neville was already in the kitchen, and they made an actual dinner, pasta, because it was what they had, and because the satisfaction of feeding people was something Neville had turned out to have a natural talent for that had nothing to do with magic, and Harry set the table for 3, and they waited. Sirius slept for 4 hours. He came downstairs at 9 o'clock looking fractionally more like himself and considerably more like someone who had been reminded what a bed felt like, and he sat at the kitchen table with the slightly wondering expression of someone who keeps finding small ordinary things remarkable, which Harry understood was Azkaban's specific legacy. The Dementors stripped everything pleasant from you and what took longest to come back was the sense that pleasant things were allowed to exist. They ate. Sirius ate slowly at first, with the careful attention of someone whose stomach had forgotten how to manage abundance, and then with more confidence as the evening progressed. He asked questions, about the vault discovery, about the trial, about what Harry had been doing for the 6 weeks since his birthday, and Harry answered them, not in the shortened diplomatic version he used with journalists or the careful legal version he used with the Wizengamot, but plainly, the way he'd started talking to Neville, which was just saying the things as they were. The journal, Sirius said, when Harry mentioned Dumbledore's research. You actually read it. All of it, Harry said. Twice. And the Horcrux theory. It's correct, Harry said. Flitwick confirmed it. We're working on the extraction. Sirius set his fork down. Not dramatically. Just set it down and looked at Harry with an expression that Harry recognized, because he'd seen it on Ragnarok's face and on Ward's face and on Flitwick's face, the face people made when they encountered something about his situation that they found simultaneously admirable and deeply unfair. "You know it's not your job," Sirius said. "Whose job is it?" Harry asked. "I don't, it shouldn't be anyone's job, it shouldn't exist as a problem, it's not, it exists," Harry said. "So it's someone's job. And I'm the one it's in, which makes the logistics cleaner if I'm involved." He picked up his water glass. "I'm not afraid of it." "I know you're not," Sirius said. "That's the part that's not entirely comfortable." "Why?" "Because you're 11. People really need to stop, I know. Sirius rubbed his face. He looked, in that moment, both younger and older than he was, younger because the gesture was so unguarded, older because the hands doing it had 12 years of Azkaban in them. I missed everything. I missed you. I was supposed to be there, I was supposed to be your godfather in the actual functional sense, and instead he stopped. "I know," Harry said. "I'm not saying it to get, I know," Harry said again. "You don't have to. It's just true and we both know it and it's not something either of us can fix, so we move forward from where we are." He put the water glass down. "Where we are is, you're here and I'm here and we don't know each other yet. That's actually pretty good, compared to where we were a week ago." Sirius looked at him across the kitchen table. Something in his expression did something complicated. "Yeah," he said, after a moment. "Yeah, that's pretty good." Neville, across the table, said nothing. He was eating the last of his pasta with the focused restraint of someone who is aware they are in the presence of something that is not their moment and is choosing appropriately to let it be. Marcus Flint came on Thursday, as arranged. He was taller than Harry had expected, 17, broad-shouldered, with the build of someone who'd grown fast, the face of someone whose default expression was scowling and who was currently making an effort not to scowl. He came through the Edinburgh flu with the slight awkwardness of someone who doesn't often flew to places they've never been, and stood in the parlor with his hands in his pockets and looked around with the careful assessment of someone determining the terrain. Sirius was in the kitchen, which Harry had mentioned in advance. Sirius's presence at this meeting was deliberate. Sirius Black, former member of a family whose name had been associated with Death Eater circles, now freed and sitting in Harry Potter's kitchen, was a particular kind of signal Harry wanted to send. "Tea," Harry said, gesturing to the kitchen table. "Or water. We haven't got much else at the moment." "Tea's fine," Flint said. He sat. Looked at Sirius without flinching. "Black." "Flint," Sirius said, pouring tea with the slightly mechanical concentration of someone rediscovering domestic tasks. "Your father visited me in Azkaban once. Ministry business." "I know," Flint said. "He mentioned it. He wanted information about Order members," Sirius said. "I didn't give him any. Not out of loyalty to Dumbledore, just because Cassius Flint is the kind of man who benefits from not knowing things." Flint's mouth twitched slightly. "Accurate," he said. Harry sat across from him. Neville was upstairs. Harry had told him about this meeting and Neville had said he'd stay out of the way, which Harry had interpreted as Neville correctly reading that this was a conversation with specific dynamics he didn't need to add to. "You said you know the inside of the Slytherin political situation," Harry said. "Tell me." Flint wrapped his hands around his tea. "Slytherin House as a block has been Malfoy's territory for 20 years, he said, without preamble. Lucius Malfoy runs it through social pressure, family alliance, and the particular threat that comes from having been on the winning side once and retained enough goodwill in certain circles to imply you could be again." He paused. Dumbledore tolerated it because the alternative was confrontation, and Malfoy was clever enough to stay just inside the line. Opposition party within the system, not actual threat. He looked at Harry. "That calculation changes now." "Because of the trial," Harry said. "Because of the trial," and because of what the trial revealed about the system. Malfoy's position depends on the existing order having enough credibility that aligning with him seems rational. If the existing order is, he gestured at the general situation, then the value proposition shifts. What does Malfoy want? Harry asked. Malfoy wants power maintained along the lines that benefit him, Flint said. That's been true his whole career. What changes is which vehicle he'll use to get it. He's been watching you very carefully. I know, Harry said. He sent a letter. My legal team intercepted it. Flint nodded, unsurprised. He'll try to position himself as an ally. He'll frame it as Slytherin solidarity, you being the Slytherin heir, him being the most prominent Slytherin family in current standing. He'll be very smooth about it. And if I decline? He'll be smooth about that too, Flint said. Until he decides on a different approach. He looked at his tea. The other students. In Slytherin. Most of them are in families with complicated histories, either Death Eater adjacent or trying not to be, or trying to benefit from both positions simultaneously. What they don't have is anyone who talks to them like they're people with actual choices. He paused. Dumbledore wrote them off. The Order wrote them off. The Ministry assumed guilt by association. Malfoy used that isolation to control them. He met Harry's eyes. That's the inside of it. Harry thought about this. What do you want? He asked. From this conversation. Flint was quiet for a moment. It was a good kind of quiet, not evasive, thinking. I want there to be a version of the next 10 years that doesn't end with everyone in Slytherin House having to pick a side that was decided for them before they were born. He paused. I also want to not spend my entire life being assumed to be the enemy because of my name. Those are reasonable things to want, Harry said. I know. Flint looked at him steadily. What do you want from this conversation? Information, Harry said. Honesty. Someone who knows the terrain inside Slytherin politics and is willing to be straight about it. He put his hands on the table. I'm going to Hogwarts in September. I'm going to sit on 7 Wizengamot seats before I do it. I'm going to walk into that school as the head of 6 houses including Slytherin, and I'm going to be dealing with Malfoy's positioning and Voldemort's return and a staff that mostly knew Dumbledore and a student body that has been told various things about what I am and none of them are accurate. He paused. I'd like to know what I'm walking into. And in exchange? Flint asked. I'll treat you like someone with actual choices, Harry said. Which is what you just said you wanted. Flint looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his tea and drank it and set it down. All right, he said. Let me tell you about Hogwarts. He talked for 2 hours. It was, Harry thought, some of the most useful intelligence he'd received since his birthday. Not the legal and financial intelligence that Ragnock and Ward and Cross had been providing, this was different. This was granular. This was the internal politics of 7 years of students in 4 houses, the specific alliances and resentments and histories and the way information moved through Hogwarts and the way power arranged itself in spaces that had their own rules distinct from the world outside. He talked about Draco Malfoy, Lucius's son, a year below Flint, incoming first year same as Harry, already positioned by his father as a potential ally or rival depending on how Harry played it. He's been told he's the most important person in the room his entire life, Flint said. He believes it. He's also not stupid, which is the complicated part. He talked about the professors, Snape, who had been Dumbledore's for decades and whose loyalties were going to be one of the more interesting questions of the coming year, McGonagall, who was honest and could be worked with, Quirrell, who Flint described with a careful specificity that made Harry pay close attention, something's wrong with him. This year, specifically. He went to Albania last summer and came back different and everyone's noticed but nobody said anything because nobody knows what to say. Albania. Harry thought about Ragnock's mention of Voldemort attempting to restore himself. Albania as a known refuge for dark magic remnants. Quirrell, returned from Albania, different. Quirrell, Harry said. His defense against the dark arts class. What's his behavior been like? Flint frowned. Erratic. Jumpy. He's been avoiding the third-floor corridor specifically, which was already forbidden, more than it being forbidden would explain. He paused. He smells wrong. I know that sounds like dark magic. Harry said. Flint looked at him. I was going to say like something dead, but, same thing, in this case, Harry said. He filed Quirrell under urgent and moved on. By the time Flint left, with a handshake and an agreement to exchange owls before September, the evening had settled fully into the Edinburgh dark, and Sirius had at some point made dinner, which Harry discovered had been happening for 45 minutes because Sirius found kitchens calming and cooking, apparently, was something 12 years in Azkaban had not managed to take from him. He's useful, Sirius said, serving rice with the focused attention of someone who has decided to do this properly. He is, Harry agreed. His father's not. His father's not in this equation. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Is he trustworthy? Not completely, Harry said. Not yet. But he's honest, which is a reasonable starting point. Sirius set a bowl down in front of Harry. You think like James and you talk like Lily, and I can't tell if that's reassuring or terrifying. Both, probably, Harry said. Sirius sat. Neville came downstairs, took in the food situation with evident approval, and sat down. And they ate dinner in the Edinburgh kitchen, 3 people and an owl who watched them from the window with the particular satisfaction of creatures who have determined that the arrangement they're currently in is the correct one. Flitwick arrived the following Saturday with the Peveril text. It was not, physically, impressive, a small book, bound in something that wasn't quite leather, the pages thick and slightly discolored at the edges with age, the writing inside in a script that was old enough that even Flitwick had needed a specialist to translate portions of it. But the theory it contained, the specific application method for soul fragment extraction that Flitwick had been tracking, was exactly what they needed. The ritual requires a moment of extreme magical catharsis, Flitwick explained, his notes spread across the kitchen table in what was by now their established configuration, Harry on one side, Flitwick across, Neville to the left because he'd determined that position gave him the best sight line to both the notes and the book simultaneously. A focused discharge of core magic, in a controlled environment, with a specific invocation that targets the fragment's distinct signature rather than the host's native magic. He pointed to a passage. The text describes it as, essentially, burning out an impurity. The fragment, being Voldemort's magic rather than yours, has a different resonance. Under the right conditions, that difference becomes the handle you use to remove it. How specific do the conditions need to be? Harry asked. The environment needs to be warded against soul magic, goblins can do this, Ragnarok has already agreed in principle. The invocation needs to be performed by someone with knowledge of Parselmouth magic, which you have, through the Slytherin bloodline, though whether I discovered that 2 weeks ago, Harry said. In the garden. I told a grass snake to get away from Neville's foot and it did. Neville looked up from the text he was reading. You didn't mention that was Parseltongue. I was working up to it. You spoke to a snake and forgot to mention, there was a lot happening that week. Flitwick, visibly suppressing delight, continued. The Parseltongue component is significant, it's the element that allows the invocation to target Voldemort's soul signature specifically. As the Slytherin heir, your Parseltongue is native, not acquired through the fragment. The fragment has its own version that we need to distinguish from yours, and the ritual does this through a resonance test that requires, he flipped the page, a genuine moment of personal emotional clarity. Not performed emotion. Real clarity. What kind of clarity? Harry asked. Flitwick looked at him. The text says, the host must know what they are apart from the fragment, with certainty, before the fragment can be shown its own boundary and expelled. It's not a magical instruction so much as a psychological one. He paused. You need to know yourself well enough to know what isn't you. Harry thought about this. He thought about the cupboard, the garden shed, the 17 years of being told he was nothing. He thought about the Edinburgh house and the ring on his finger and Sirius's laugh in the ministry corridor and Neville's face when a stone floated 6 feet in the air and stayed there. "I can do that," he said. "I believe you can," Flitwick said quietly. "When?" "Next weekend," Flitwick said. "Ragnarok has agreed. We do it in Gringotts, in the ritual room where your inheritance ceremony was performed. It's already warded for soul magic, has been since they built it. The goblins are thorough about these things." "Sirius should be there," Harry said. Sirius, who was in the doorway with a cup of tea, having been listening for the past 10 minutes without contributing, said, "I was going to say the same thing." "It might be unpleasant to watch," Flitwick said. "I've watched unpleasant things," Sirius said. "I'd rather watch than wait." Harry nodded. "Next weekend," he said. "All of us." The night before the ritual, Harry couldn't sleep. Not from fear. He'd established, fairly thoroughly, that he wasn't afraid of this. He just couldn't sleep, the way you can't sleep before something important, not because you're dreading it but because your brain is too awake to participate in ordinary rest. He got up at 2 a.m. and went downstairs. Sat at the kitchen table in the dark. Didn't light the fire. Just sat. After a few minutes, Sirius came down the stairs. He sat across from Harry without turning the lights on either. They sat in the dark kitchen in the Edinburgh house, the city quiet outside, and didn't say anything for a while. "Do you remember them?" Harry asked eventually. "My parents. What they were like, day to day." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "James was, chaos, contained," he said. Absolutely confident that whatever was happening was going to turn out fine, and about 60% of the time he was right. The other 40%, Lily fixed it. A pause. "Lily was the smartest person in any room she was in and she knew it, but she made you feel like you were the smart one, which is a gift. She also had a temper like a house fire. Warm until it wasn't, and then very very hot." Harry absorbed this. "Were they happy?" "Very," Sirius said, without hesitation. "Right up until they weren't." He looked at his hands on the table. "They'd have been good at this, too. What you're doing. James would have charged into it and Lily would have organized it into something that actually worked. Instead I charge into it and organize it myself," Harry said. Sirius smiled. It was getting easier for him to do that, Harry had noticed. "Yes," he said. "Instead." They sat for a while longer. "Sirius," Harry said. "Yeah. Whatever happens tomorrow. The extraction. I want you to know that it doesn't, I'm not going into it as a sacrifice. I'm going into it as a problem with a solution." He looked across the dark table. "I just wanted to say that clearly." Sirius looked at him. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm not trying to talk you out of it." "Good. It's also why you scare me slightly," Sirius said. "For the record. I thought you said I was like James." "James would have scared me slightly too," Sirius said. "I just knew James long enough to get used to it." Harry thought about this. "You'll get used to it," he said. Sirius laughed, quiet, genuine, the laugh Harry was already learning to listen for. "Yeah," he said. "I will." Outside, Edinburgh breathed its slow city breath, and the clock on the wall moved forward, and in the morning they would go to Gringotts and do the thing that needed doing, and the night held them in the meantime, the dark Edinburgh kitchen, the two people learning how to be family at a table that had waited 12 years longer than it should have to hold them both. Chapter 6, Lord of Six Houses. The morning of the ritual, Harry woke before anyone else. He lay in the Edinburgh bedroom for exactly 3 minutes looking at the ceiling, which was his established method for determining whether he was going to need more time in bed or whether his brain had already decided the day was starting. His brain had decided. He got up. He dressed carefully. Not the formal robes, those were for the afternoon, for the investiture ceremony that was going to happen whether or not the ritual worked, because he'd decided some time ago that the two events were independent and he wasn't going to treat one as contingent on the other. He dressed in ordinary clothes, good jeans, a dark shirt, the dragonhide boots Ward had insisted on as part of a shopping trip that Harry had tolerated with reasonable grace. The ring on his finger. Nothing else. He went downstairs. Sirius was already in the kitchen. He'd been sleeping better in the past week, the shadows under his eyes had lightened from purple to gray, and he moved through the house now with the ease of someone who had stopped being surprised each morning that it was still there. He was making eggs with the focused concentration of someone who had decided that cooking was the thing they were going to be good at in this new chapter and was pursuing that goal with systematic commitment. "You don't have to feed everyone every morning," Harry said, sitting down. "I know," Sirius said. "I want to." Harry understood this and didn't argue with it. He accepted the eggs. Neville came down at 7, looked at the eggs, looked at Sirius, and said, "I was going to make tea." "Already done," Sirius said. Neville sat down. "This household is very efficient," he said, in a tone that suggested he found this slightly alarming. "We have things to do," Harry said. "We always have things to do. Today especially." Neville looked at him across the table. "How are you?" "Good," Harry said. "Not nervous?" "No." Neville studied him for a moment with the careful attention he developed over the past few weeks that Harry had come to recognize as his particular way of checking whether Harry was telling the truth or telling the convenient version of the truth. Apparently satisfied, he picked up his fork. "Flitwick's meeting us there at 9. 8:30. He wants to go through the invocation one more time. We've gone through it 6 times. He wants 7. Neville ate his eggs. "Fair enough." Flitwick was waiting on the Gringotts steps when they arrived, which was not surprising, and he was wearing his very best teaching robes, which Harry had not expected and found, for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate, deeply reassuring. Like a professor dressing well for an exam because they respect the subject. "Lord Potter," Flitwick said. Then, Neville. Sirius, a pause, because Flitwick had known Sirius tangentially for years and his release was recent enough that the sight of him still registered with a small visible adjustment. "It's very good to see you free." "It's very good to be free," Sirius said. "Good morning, Phileas." Sharprock was waiting inside, which was also not surprising. What was slightly surprising was that 3 other senior goblins Harry didn't recognize were with him, standing in a row with the formal gravity of officials attending something of institutional significance. Ragnock appeared from an inner door a moment later, in his most formal robes, dark red with gold that caught the Gringotts torchlight, and the combination of the formal dress and the formal delegation told Harry something about how Gringotts was reading this morning. "Hi Chief," Harry said. "Harry," Ragnock said. He looked at Harry with those ancient eyes and seemed to be doing his own calibration of the situation. "Are you ready?" "Yes," Harry said. "The room is prepared. The wards have been set since last night. We reinforced the existing soul magic protections with 3 additional layers." Ragnock's hands moved once, a small gesture. "This is, in our record keeping, the 3rd time in the history of Gringotts that this particular combination of wards has been activated." "What were the other 2 times?" Harry asked. "The first was when we contained an artifact of Salazar Slytherin's that attempted active possession of 3 of our staff in 1347, Ragnock said. The second was when we assisted Nicholas Flamel in a procedure of his own, in 1602. He met Harry's eyes. "We take the work seriously." "I know," Harry said. "Thank you." Ragnock inclined his head and turned to lead them through the bank. The ritual room was exactly as Harry remembered it from his birthday. Round, low-ceilinged, the walls inlaid with runes that were warm and lit and active in a way they hadn't been between visits. The stone basin in the center. But the feel of the room was different from that morning 6 weeks ago, denser, like the air had been compressed slightly, the way air feels before a storm. The additional wards manifested as a faint shimmer at the perimeter, barely visible, the kind of thing you felt in your skin before you saw it with your eyes. Flitwick went immediately to the runes on the eastern wall, checking something in his notes against what was carved there, nodding to himself in the way of someone confirming that the real thing matches the plan. Sirius stood near the door and stayed near it, not out of hesitation but with the deliberate positioning of someone who has thought about where they should be and selected accordingly. Close enough. Out of the way of what needed to happen. Neville positioned himself near Flitwick, which was where he'd been in every practice session and where he was most useful, ready to hand things to Flitwick at specific moments in the invocation sequence, because they'd worked out between them that Flitwick's hands were going to be occupied and Neville's were not. Harry stood next to the basin. He put his right hand on its edge. The stone was cool under his palm, then warm, the basin recognizing him the way it had the first time. One more time, Flitwick said, coming to stand across the basin from him. The sequence. Walk me through it. This was for Flitwick's benefit, Harry understood, confirmation, ritual itself, the professor's way of ensuring everything was in sequence before they committed. He'd asked the same thing before every practice session. Harry went through it. The invocation is in 3 parts, Harry said. The first part establishes the distinction, my magic versus the fragments. That's the Parseltongue section, and it needs to be directed inward, not outward. The second part is the extraction invocation itself. Flitwick performs that while I hold the first part steady. The third part is the expulsion, I discharge the identified fragment through the basin. The basin's wards contain it. Gringotts then neutralizes it. And the psychological component, Flitwick said. Not testing him. Just completing the sequence. I need to know what I am apart from the fragment, Harry said. With certainty. Not belief. Certainty. Do you have that? Harry thought about the nursery in Godric's Hollow. The photograph in his breast pocket, it was there now, it was always there. His mother laughing. The handwriting on the back, slightly hurried, full of feeling. I love him so much it's ridiculous. He thought about Ragnarok's ancient goblins bowing in the hall. He thought about Neville's face when a stone floated in the garden. He thought about Sirius laughing in the ministry corridor, the genuine laugh of a man discovering he could still do it. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs, and the boy who'd lived in it, and who that boy had been all along underneath the invisibility the Dursleys had required of him. He thought about the photograph in the Gringotts vault, the inheritance document, the blood column rising in this very basin, all 7 houses activating in sequence because the blood knew what it was even when nobody had ever told it. He knew what he was. Yes, he said. Flitwick looked at him for a moment. His small face was very still and very focused, and underneath the professional focus was something personal, something that remembered Lily Evans in a charms classroom, apparently, and was doing the work of a lifetime in her son's service. Then we begin, Flitwick said. Harry closed his eyes. Not because he needed to, but because the distinction he needed to establish was an interior thing, and the interior was easier to access without the room's visual information competing for his attention. He found the place in himself where his magic lived, not a metaphor, genuinely a place, a warmth and a pressure at the center of his chest, the thing that had been there his whole life before he had any framework for it, the thing that had made light bulbs flare and teachers' hair change color and Dudley's bullies trip over nothing in particular. He found it. And adjacent to it, not inside it, adjacent, exactly as Flitwick had described, something else. Cooler. Not cold, not hostile, simply different. A different resonance, a different signature, the way you can feel the difference between 2 people's hands in the dark. He opened his mouth and spoke. The Parseltongue came differently than it did with the grass snake in the garden. That had been casual, almost instinctive, the same as calling out to something in your own language without thinking about it. This was intentional, directed inward, the language of serpents turned on itself as a diagnostic tool, and the effect was immediate and strange. The 2 signatures became visible to whatever sense was doing this work, like 2 colors becoming distinguishable in a light that illuminates that frequency specifically. His. And not his. He held the distinction steady. He heard Flitwick begin the extraction invocation. Not in Parseltongue, in Latin, Old Latin, pre-classical Latin with constructions that Flitwick had worked through with a specialist for 3 days to be certain they were accurate. The words moved through the room and the runes on the walls responded, pulsing once, twice, in a rhythm that matched something in Harry's chest. The fragment knew what was happening. That was the part Harry hadn't fully anticipated, the way the foreign thing in him became aware of the process and reacted. Not with intelligence, not with the personality of Voldemort himself, but with the animal self-preservation of a soul piece that had been attached to a host for a decade and recognized the end of that attachment. It pressed inward, away from the direction of the invocation, and Harry felt the pressure of it against his core. He didn't push back. Pushing back would engage it on its own terms. Instead he did what the Peveril text had described, he simply remained what he was. Clearly. Completely. He thought about who he was, not as a list of facts but as a lived certainty, the weight of himself in his own chest, and the distinction became more defined, not less, the pressure of the fragment finding nothing to grip because Harry had filled his own space so completely that there was nowhere for it to be. This, he understood distantly, was what Dumbledore had missed in his theory. He'd been right about the Horcrux. He'd been wrong about the prognosis. He'd thought the fragment was integrated, had assumed integration because he'd assumed a child left in a cupboard under the stairs would have an incomplete enough sense of self that the fragment would grow into the gaps. He'd been wrong about that. The fragment was never integrated. Harry had always known who he was, even without anyone telling him. Especially without anyone telling him. The fragment found no gaps and the invocation had its edges and the basin below Harry's hand began to glow. Flitwick's voice reached the third section of the invocation and Harry opened his eyes. The discharge was not dramatic. He'd expected something cinematic, expected it the way you expect things that matter to announce themselves with lights and noise. What happened instead was quiet, a brief, sharp cold in the center of his chest, and then warmth, and then a silver-dark thread of something rose from him, drawn upward by the invocation, pulled toward the basin, and fell into it. The basin flared once, contained, a pulse of that gold-silver light he'd seen on his birthday. Then nothing. Harry stood next to the basin with his hand on its edge and breathed. The room was very quiet. The runes on the walls faded slowly back to their resting state, one by one, like lights going out. Flitwick lowered his wand and looked at Harry with the particular expression of a person who has just done the most important thing they have ever done and is not entirely certain their legs are going to hold them. Well? Neville said, from across the room. Harry looked inward. What he felt was, more room. Like something that had been occupying space adjacent to everything else had been lifted away, and what remained was his own magic, his own self, clean and whole and exactly his size. Not larger. Not different. Just unobstructed. It's done, he said. Flitwick sat down on the floor. Just sat, not as a gesture of relief but as a simple structural response to the fact that he had been standing for the entirety of a very demanding piece of magical work and his body had an opinion about this. Neville crouched next to him immediately with the practical concern of someone who had gotten used to paying attention. Sirius crossed the room in 3 strides and stood in front of Harry. He didn't grab him. Didn't hug him, not yet, they were still learning the edges of that. He just stood there, very close, and looked at Harry with those gray eyes that had 12 years of Azkaban in them and beyond the 12 years whatever had been there before that was still there, and said, "Okay?" "Okay," Harry said. Sirius put one hand briefly on Harry's shoulder. Pressed once. Let go. That was enough. Ragnarok, who had stood at the back of the room throughout with his formal delegation in absolute stillness, stepped forward. He looked at the basin, which was cool and dark and quiet. He looked at Harry. "It is neutralized," Ragnarok said. Not a question. He'd watched it happen and he was a high chief and he trusted his own eyes. "Yes," Harry said. "Good." Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. "The investiture is in 3 hours," he said. You should eat something. Harry looked at Sirius. Sirius looked at Harry. A wordless conversation happened in approximately 2 seconds, the kind of conversation that has to do with the particular absurdity of Ragnarok, High Chief of all Gringotts, recommending a snack. "We'll eat," Harry said, keeping his face entirely level. The International Confederation of Wizards' formal chamber in London was not a room Harry had seen before. It occupied the top floor of a building on a street that didn't appear on any Muggle map, accessible from the wizarding world through a door in the back of a tailor's shop in Marylebone that Harry had been directed to by Sharma, who had spent 3 days organizing today's logistics with the thoroughness of someone who had decided this ceremony was going to go perfectly and had communicated this intention to all relevant parties. The chamber was older than the ministry. That was apparent the moment you walked in. It had the particular quality of a space that has been important for a very long time, the kind of importance that settles into the stonework and the air and the way sound moves in the room. High ceilings, curved walls, a gallery running the upper level that was already filling when Harry's group arrived. Representatives of 32 magical governments, some in robes Harry recognized, most in their own country's formal wear, a tapestry of magical cultures gathered to witness something that technically happened twice a century at best and hadn't happened with this particular configuration of houses in recorded history. Madame Delacroix was at the front, near the dais, in Confederation formal robes with an observer's badge that she'd been wearing for 6 weeks now and wore with the practiced ease of someone who had fully inhabited their institutional role. She saw Harry come in and gave him the same single precise nod she'd given him in the ritual room on his birthday. He returned it. Ward was there, seated at a desk to the left of the dais with Cross and Sharma, the legal team's presence part of the formal record-keeping requirements for the ceremony. She looked at Harry as he walked in and gave him an expression that communicated, "Everything is organized, everything is in order, for the love of magic please don't improvise." Harry gave her an expression that communicated, "I never improvise." Ward's expression communicated, "You absolutely do." He found his position at the foot of the dais. The gallery above was not exclusively Confederation representatives, there were guests, witnesses, people who had been allocated seats through various processes Harry had been briefed on but not involved in selecting. He didn't look for faces yet. Later. Augusta Longbottom was there, which he'd known. She was representing the Longbottom family and its allied interests, which was now a formal role with formal weight. Neville was beside her in proper Longbottom robes that fit him properly for the first time in his life, because Augusta had apparently decided that this moment required appropriate clothing and had gone to Twilfit and Tattings herself. Sirius was there. In black family formal robes, the good ones, the very old ones that Harry had found in the Edinburgh house in a trunk in the 4th floor wardrobe and given to him last week, robes that fit him exactly right because they were made for a black and he was the black. He looked, in them, considerably more like himself than he had in the plain grey ministry issue. He caught Harry's eye from the gallery and something passed between them, not a signal, not strategy, just contact, the eye contact of two people who are in a room together and know it. Flitwick was in the front row of the gallery, still in his best teaching robes, which Harry had begun to think of as his ceremonial dress for the duration of this chapter of events. And Marcus Flint, in the 3rd row, in plain robes with no family crest displayed. He'd come, which Harry had not been entirely certain about. He was watching the chamber with the careful attention of someone taking in every detail and not showing what they thought of it. On the dais, the Confederation's presiding official, a tall woman named Director Vasquez, whose authority covered international treaty enforcement and who had clearly dealt with unusual situations before but was performing the professional neutrality of someone who had decided this one was going to be handled with absolute propriety, called the chamber to order. The investiture ceremony was an old piece of magic. Older than the ministry, older than most of the institutions it was recognizing today, rooted in the same kind of blood-and-earth magic that had established the houses in the first place. Harry had read through the ceremony's requirements twice and found it, elegant, was the word. Honestly elegant. It did not require performance. It required presence and acknowledgement and the formalization of something that already existed. Director Vasquez spoke the opening words of the ceremony in the old form, not Latin, something older than Latin, and the chamber's stonework responded the same way the Gringotts ritual room had, a subtle activation that you felt before you heard. "We are gathered," she said, "to formally witness and record the acknowledgement of lawful inheritance, under the treaties of 1689 and the ancient codes of magical lineage that predate all treaties. The heir is present. The houses are registered. Let the acknowledgement proceed." She looked at Harry. "Lord Potter Peveril Black Gryffindor Slytherin Hufflepuff Ravenclaw. You stand before the International Confederation of Wizards to receive formal investiture of the following houses." She read them. All 7, with their founding dates and their histories and the specific lineage claims that established each one, the whole record read aloud in a chamber full of people who represented the whole of the magical world. It took 12 minutes. Harry stood at the foot of the dais and listened to his own inheritance described out loud, and it sounded different heard this way, not the clinical documentation of a legal file, but the actual accumulated history of 7 families who had each been something real in the world, who had each done things and built things and left things behind, and whose blood had ended up, through the specific improbable sequence of 2 people falling in love in the early 60s and a baby born in July 1980. In him. "Do you accept this investiture?" Director Vasquez said, "with the responsibilities, obligations, and authorities attendant thereto, as recorded by the International Confederation of Wizards in the Treaty Registry of Magical Houses?" "I do," Harry said. Vasquez lifted her wand. The Confederation seal appeared in the air above the dais, gold and blue, the crossed wands over the globe, and she brought it down onto the registration document on the podium with a tap that sealed the record with a sound like a bell struck once, clean and carrying. The ring on Harry's finger flared. All 7 crests, the interlocked metal warm against his skin, the stones catching the chamber's light. It lasted a moment and then subsided to its ordinary warmth. That was the ceremony. Old and simple and real. The gallery applauded. Harry stood at the foot of the dais and waited for it to settle. The reception afterward was not something Harry had been consulted about extensively, which had been a deliberate choice on Sharma's part on the grounds that if Harry had been consulted he would have simplified it into something that didn't serve the diplomatic functions it needed to serve. Harry had accepted this assessment, which was accurate. What he had negotiated was the order of conversations. The diplomatic interactions with foreign government representatives happened in the first 30 minutes, managed by Sharma at his elbow with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew which conversation needed to happen before which other conversation. Harry spoke to the French delegation, Apollon Delacour's husband Claude, who was smooth and interested and clearly briefed, and who raised the Triwizard Tournament in the second minute of conversation, which confirmed that the French government's interest was not exclusively diplomatic. "The tournament format is still being finalized," Harry said pleasantly. "I'll be at Hogwarts in September. We'll have time to discuss it properly." Claude Delacour smiled the smile of someone who has gotten approximately the answer they were expecting and finds it adequate. "Of course. My wife asked me to convey her personal regards." "And mine to her," Harry said. "I look forward to meeting your daughter eventually." "She is looking forward to meeting you," Claude said, with the particular expression of a father who is slightly rueful about his daughter's enthusiasms and resigned to them. With some intensity. Harry moved to the next conversation before he had to respond to that. The Egyptian delegation wanted to discuss the Peveril Vault's artifacts, several of which had ancient Egyptian connections. The American Magical Congress representative wanted to discuss the international treaty implications of the Wizengamot seat consolidation. The German ministry representative wanted to discuss Grindelwald, specifically the Elder Wand, specifically the question of what would happen to it now that Dumbledore was in custody, which was a question Harry had been expecting and had a prepared answer for that was careful enough to be honest and brief enough to be non-committal. At the 45-minute mark, the diplomatic rotation wound down and the room shifted to something less formal. Harry found himself standing with a glass of something mildly sparkling that had been pressed into his hand and no immediate obligation, which was a rarer state than it had been for the past 6 weeks, and he appreciated it for approximately 30 seconds before Cornelius Fudge appeared. This was less unexpected than it might have been. Fudge had been at the ceremony in his official capacity as minister, it was his function to be present, and his presence was correct even if his current expression was a complicated blend of political calculation and something that wanted to be appealing. "Lord Potter," Fudge said. "Wonderful ceremony." "Simply, I wanted to personally, Minister," Harry said. "How are the sentencing proceedings going?" Fudge blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Dumbledore's sentencing. The Wizengamot's next session is Thursday. I've had it in my diary but my legal team has been managing the ministry-facing elements. I wondered if you'd had any preliminary indication from Marchbanks about the, yes, there have been preliminary discussions," Fudge said, visibly recalibrating from whatever opening he'd planned to the conversation Harry was actually having. "The likely range is, house arrest initially, with a monitoring order, pending the Confederation's parallel proceedings on the international treaty violations," Harry said. "That's what Cross expects. I think that's appropriate, given his age and health and the non-violent nature of the charges. Azkaban would be disproportionate." Fudge stared at him. You're not advocating for what?" Harry said. "For him to be imprisoned?" "No. He was wrong. He did real harm. He's been convicted on 27 counts and that record exists and the compensation orders will be enforced." He picked up his sparkling drink. "I don't need him to suffer. I just needed him to be accountable. There's a difference." Fudge processed this. "That's very measured," he said, in the tone of someone who had expected a different kind of 11-year-old and has not yet finished adjusting. "I learned it from someone," Harry said. Then, because he was curious, Minister. "The DMLE's handling of the original vault situation, and the Black case. Director Bones has indicated that an internal review is underway." "Yes," Fudge said, carefully. "I want that review to be thorough," Harry said. "Not to punish anyone specifically, but because the system that allowed those situations to persist for 17 years is still the system that's running, and I'm going to be operating within it, and I'd like it to work properly." He looked at Fudge. "I think that's something we have in common." Fudge looked at him for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, not the political calculation, but something underneath it, something that was perhaps the actual Cornelius Fudge, whoever that was when he wasn't performing the role. "Yes," he said, with slightly more sincerity than usual. "I believe we do." "Good," Harry said. "My legal team will be in touch about the ministry coordination on the vault restoration. I appreciate your office's cooperation." He moved away before it could become anything else. Across the room, Ward caught his eye and gave him a microscopic nod that meant, "Well done," and also, "I'm slightly relieved." He found Sirius on the far side of the reception room, standing near a window with a glass of wine he'd barely touched and the expression of someone who is managing a large public social event by staying near the wall and projecting the quality of not being available for casual conversation. It was working. Nobody had approached him, whether because of his expression or because ex-Azkaban convicts at international diplomatic receptions were a category people didn't quite have a social script for. Harry stood beside him. "Fudge looked shaken," Sirius said, without looking at him. "He usually does. You handled him well." "I was direct." "He finds direct disorienting." "Most politicians do." Sirius turned his glass in his hand. "The French delegation was watching you for the first 20 minutes. I know. Their daughter is apparently interested in meeting me." "She's 13, Sirius said, in the carefully neutral voice of someone whose protective instincts have been activated by something and are doing their best to not be unreasonable about it. "She's apparently very interested in international wizarding politics," Harry said, equally neutral. A pause. "That's fine then," Sirius said. They stood for a moment in companionable quiet, the reception moving around them, the gallery above now only sparsely occupied, the afternoon light coming through the chamber windows at the angle that meant it was somewhere past 3 o'clock. "How do you feel?" Sirius asked. Harry thought about this morning. The ritual room. The fragment lifting away and the clean warmth of what remained. "Better," he said. "Like, cleaner. Like when you fix something that's been slightly wrong for so long you stop noticing it was wrong, and then suddenly it isn't. Sirius nodded slowly. You sound like your mother, he said. She described magic that way. Clean or not clean. Not good or bad, just whether it was doing what it was supposed to do. Harry filed this away with the other things people told him about her. He was building a portrait of her from fragments, which was not the same as knowing her but was something, and something was considerably better than nothing. What's next? Sirius asked. Harry looked out the window at the London afternoon. 6 weeks ago he'd been on the roof of the garden shed at Privet Drive with a letter in his lap. 11 years old and invisible and owned by a set of circumstances he'd had no part in choosing. Now he was standing at an international reception having just been formally invested in 6 ancient houses and one most ancient house, with a legal team and a research collaboration and a godfather and a friend and a relationship with the oldest bank in Wizarding Britain and a house in Edinburgh and 11 more properties and a very good owl. Hogwarts, he said. The Hogwarts letter had arrived the previous week. It had arrived, specifically, in the middle of a Tuesday morning when Harry was reading through the Flitwick annotated Peveril text for the 6th time, by a school owl that landed on the kitchen table and set down the envelope with the air of a bird completing a mission that had taken rather longer than expected due to address complications. Harry had looked at the envelope, cream parchment, the familiar seal, the green ink, his name and his Edinburgh address, and had set it aside to finish the paragraph he was reading. Ward had apparently been notified by the school's owl registration system simultaneously, because she appeared via Flu 11 minutes later with her own copy and an expression suggesting that she had been waiting for this event and had opinions about it. You're enrolled as of September 1st, she said, sitting down without being asked. Standard first-year curriculum, Gryffindor probable placement based on historical family, that's actually something I wanted to discuss, Harry said. Ward looked at him. The sorting. I know how it works, the hat examines your qualities and places you in the house that fits you best. I have 6 house lordships including all 4 founders' houses. I want to speak to the hat before it makes its decision, and I want the conversation with the hat to be private. Ward was quiet for a moment. That's, historically unprecedented. I know. The hat is an artifact of Hogwarts governance structure. Requesting a private consultation with it is, I'm the heir of all 4 founders, Harry said. Technically I'm the hat's employer in a property rights sense. I'm not demanding anything. I'm requesting a conversation. Ward looked at him for a very long time. I'll contact McGonagall, she said. McGonagall had replied within 24 hours. The reply was crisp and professional and contained exactly the information Harry needed. She had consulted the hat, which had communicated its willingness to have a preliminary discussion with Harry in her office on the morning of September 1st, prior to the sorting ceremony. Harry had written back, thank you. I'll be there. He'd also written to McGonagall about Quirrell. That letter had taken longer to compose because it required calibrating exactly how much to say and in what form to say it. He'd settled on, direct but limited. He'd outlined what Flint had observed, what he knew about Albania, what Ragnarok had described regarding the Gringotts perimeter test. He'd recommended, not demanded, recommended, that Quirrell be placed under a monitoring order before term began, that the data position be reviewed urgently, and that the security arrangements for the 3rd-floor corridor be assessed by someone with expertise in spirit magic. McGonagall's response had taken 3 days. It was longer than her previous letter, and considerably more serious in tone. She had confirmed that she shared certain concerns about Quirrell that she had not previously articulated to anyone. She had initiated a review through Dumbledore's interim replacement as headmaster, the deputy headship falling to her automatically, giving her the authority to act on it. She had been, reading between the lines, both grateful for the information and quietly alarmed by the ease with which an 11-year-old had identified and articulated what she'd been unable to name. She'd also written, at the end, in a slightly different register from the official tone of the rest, your mother was one of the finest students I taught in 40 years of teaching. I expect you'll be a different kind of challenge. I find that I'm looking forward to it, which is not something I say easily. Harry had read that 3 times. Now, standing at the reception room window with Sirius, he thought about September. About the train and the castle and the first proper experience of being in a place that was built for people like him, magical, young, with things to learn that he was interested in learning. He thought about the hat, and the conversation he was going to have with it about houses and identity and the question of what it meant to belong to 6 of them simultaneously. He thought about Draco Malfoy, who had been told his whole life he was the most important person in the room. He thought about what happened when you put that person in a room with someone who genuinely didn't care about that. He thought about the Philosopher's Stone, safely transferred to Flamel now. The transfer had happened the previous Thursday, via a route that involved 3 Gringotts Cursebreakers, a portkey network in 4 segments, and the kind of counter-surveillance that Ragnarok had organized with the satisfaction of someone who found this kind of work genuinely enjoyable. Flamel had sent a thank you note that was 665 years old in its emotional register, gracious, formal, and containing a recipe for a restorative potion that Harry gathered was probably the most valuable thing he'd ever been given. He thought about Voldemort. The fragment was gone. Ragnarok had confirmed that the Gringotts neutralization was complete, the soul piece destroyed, which meant that one of the remaining Horcruxes was gone and the tether between Harry and Voldemort was cut. Voldemort could no longer feel Harry's location or access his emotions. The healer's assessment at Gringotts the morning after the ritual had confirmed that Harry's magical core was clean and unobstructed and, in the healer's professionally understated phrasing, somewhat more substantial than typically seen in children of this age, which is consistent with the documented lineage. Somewhat more substantial. Harry had looked at that phrasing and thought, yes, probably. The remaining Horcruxes were in Dumbledore's journal, Nagini, the snake, which was with Voldemort wherever Voldemort currently was, a cup belonging to Helga Hufflepuff, last known location Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, a diadem belonging to Rowena Ravenclaw, hidden in Hogwarts itself. All documented. All now in the research file that Harry kept updated and that Flitwick was working through systematically. One problem at a time, he'd told himself. The fragment was done. Sirius was free. The vaults were restoring. The trial was concluded. The investiture was done. Now, Hogwarts. You're planning something, Sirius said, from beside him. I'm always planning something, Harry said. You're doing the planning something face more than usual. Is that a face? You get very still, Sirius said. Quiet. James did the opposite, he got louder when he was planning things. Like his thoughts were too big for his head and some of them leaked out. He looked at Harry. You hold them in. It's more efficient, Harry said. Yes, Sirius said. That's Lily. Harry smiled, slightly. He was getting used to these comparisons, not because they'd become ordinary, but because he was learning what they meant. Not you're like them, exactly. More like, they're in you. And they were. He could feel it now, without the fragment obscuring things, could feel the clean lines of who he was, where he'd come from, what had been given to him. I'm going to need you to not come to Hogwarts and fight my battles, Harry said. Sirius looked offended. I wouldn't, you absolutely would. You'd have a reason every time that would be completely reasonable and you'd still be there every other week. Sirius opened his mouth. Closed it. I'm getting a dog, he said. And a flat in Edinburgh while you're at school. And I'll write. Good, Harry said. Every week. Every week, Sirius agreed. They shook hands on it, which was slightly absurd given the circumstances, and both of them knew it was absurd, and neither of them made anything of that. Neville found him 20 minutes later, near the side door that led to the staircase down. The reception was winding down, the Confederation representatives departing with the smooth efficiency of people who had other places to be and had allocated exactly the correct amount of time to this one. Ward was at the documentation desk with Cross, the final paperwork for the registry moving through its last stages. Ready to go? Neville asked. 1 minute, Harry said. He went to the documentation desk. Ward looked up. "There's one more thing I need to add to the registry," Harry said. Ward looked at him. "The registry is closed for the ceremony. Everything's filed." "I know. This isn't a house matter." He put a folded piece of parchment on the desk. "It's a motion. For the Wizengamot's next session." Ward picked it up. "Read it." Her expression changed once and then settled. "You're proposing a formal review of all convictions in which Dumbledore was chief warlock and no trial transcript exists," she said. "Yes. She paused. "That's not just Sirius Black. That's potentially dozens of cases from the war years." "I know," Harry said. "Some of them will hold up. Some of them won't. Either way, they deserve to be looked at." "This will take years," Ward said. "Yes," Harry said. "That's fine. It should be done right." Ward looked at the motion for a moment. Then she looked at Harry with an expression that was, for once, not the professional focus of a very good barrister managing a complicated client but something more personal than that, the expression of someone who went into law because they believed in something and has just been reminded of what that was. "I'll file it," she said. "Thank you," Harry said. He went back to Neville. Neville looked at his expression and said, "What did you just do?" "Started something that'll take a long time to finish," Harry said. "Is that a habit of yours?" "Getting to be one," Harry said. They went down the stairs together, out through the tailor's shop, into a Marylebone afternoon that was warm and ordinary and going about its business with no awareness of what had just happened one floor above it. Muggle London on a Thursday, shops and buses and people with places to be, and Harry Potter walking through it in his good boots with 7 house lordships in his ring and the clean weight of his own unobstructed self in his chest. Neville was quiet for a half a block, then, "Do you know what house you're going in?" "At Hogwarts." "I have a conversation with the hat first," Harry said. "Then we'll see." "What are you going to say to the hat?" Harry thought about it. "The truth," he said. "Which is?" "I belong to all of them," Harry said. "In my blood. In my name. In the ring." He looked at his hand, the 7 crests catching the afternoon light. "But a lord isn't the same as a student. As a student I need to learn things, not govern things. I need a house that teaches me what I don't already know." He put his hand back in his pocket. "I haven't decided which one that is yet. I'm going to let the hat have an opinion." Neville walked for a moment. "That's very reasonable." "I'm very reasonable." "You're terrifying," Neville said, "and very reasonable. They're not mutually exclusive." Harry laughed. It came easily, which was something he was still slightly surprised by each time, the way laughter had become easy without his noticing when that had happened. They walked to the apparition point on the corner where Sharma had arranged a portkey back to Edinburgh, and the afternoon moved around them, and in 3 weeks the Hogwarts Express would leave from King's Cross and a new chapter of things would begin. Harry stood on the corner and turned his face up to the September approaching sky, blue and slightly hazy with the last warmth of summer, and he thought, all right. What's next? Not afraid. Not hiding. Not small. Just himself, finally, completely, in the world that was his. The letter arrived the following morning. His response was waiting to be sent. He'd written it the night before, sitting at the kitchen table with Sirius reading in the chair by the window and Neville on the floor with the botanical first edition finally being properly read, Athena watching from the back of the sofa with one eye open. The letter was from Dumbledore. Dear Harry, I have been informed of the soul fragment extraction. I cannot adequately express my relief. I had feared, for 10 years, I had feared what that fragment meant for you, and for what I believed would eventually have to be done. To know that it is resolved, cleanly, without the cost I thought inevitable, I am simply glad. I expect you'll manage Hogwarts as you've managed everything else. I expect you'll frustrate McGonagall thoroughly in the most productive possible way. I hope you'll play Quidditch. I have been told you were present at my trial. I don't have a word for what I am, about that. There isn't a right one. I think you know that I'm sorry. I think you know I mean it. Albus Dumbledore. Harry's response was already written. Dumbledore, I know. Harry Potter. He gave it to Athena. She took it with her usual air of someone who finds their work obvious but will perform it anyway. He watched her go from the kitchen window, the morning light gold on her wings, the Edinburgh rooftop spread below her, the city going about its day. Then he turned back to the kitchen. Sirius was making eggs. Neville was already at the table, the botanical first edition beside his plate. Harry sat down. What are we working on today? Neville asked. Harry pulled Dumbledore's journal toward him. The remaining Horcruxes. The Quirrell situation. The Hufflepuff cup in Lestrange's vault. The diadem somewhere in Hogwarts. The ongoing matter of a fragmented Dark Lord trying to reconstitute himself in Albania. Same as yesterday, Harry said. Everything. Sirius set a plate in front of him. Neville was already reading. Athena would be back in an hour. The Edinburgh house held them the way it had held things for centuries, steadily, without fuss, with the particular warmth of a place that knows its purpose. And outside its walls, the wizarding world was reshaping itself around the fact of Harry Potter, adjusting to the reality of what he was and what he'd done and what he was going to do, and the reshaping was uncomfortable and necessary and ongoing. Harry ate his eggs. He had a lot to do. He was not afraid of any of it.